An Italian Dream by Charles Dickens, from his book Pictures from Italy. Read for Dreams Collection 3, Stories and Poems by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Italian Dream by Charles Dickens. I had been traveling for some days, resting very little in the night and never in the day. The rapid and unbroken succession of novelties that had passed before me came back like half-formed dreams, and a crowd of objects wandered in the greatest confusion through my mind as I traveled on by a solitary road. At intervals, some one among them would stop, as it were, in its restless flitting to and fro, and enable me to look at it quite steadily and behold it in full distinctness. After a few moments it would dissolve like a view in a magic lantern, and while I saw some part of it quite plainly, and some faintly, and some not at all, would show me another of the many places I had lately seen, lingering behind it and coming through it. This was no sooner visible than, in its turn, it melted into something else. At one moment I was standing again before the brown old rugged churches of Modena. As I recognized the curious pillars with grim monsters for their bases, I seemed to see them standing by themselves in the quiet square of Padua, where there were the staid old university and the figures, demurely gowned, grouped here and there in the open space about it. Then I was strolling in the outskirts of that pleasant city, admiring the unusual neatness of the dwelling-houses, gardens, and orchards, as I had seen them a few hours before. In their stead arose immediately the 2 towers of Bologna, and the most obstinate of all these objects failed to hold its ground a minute before the monstrous moated castle of Ferrara, which, like an illustration to a wild romance, came back again in the red sunrise, lording it over the solitary grass-grown withered town. In short, I had that incoherent but delightful jumble in my brain which travelers are apt to have and are indolently willing to encourage. Every shake of the coach in which I sat, half dozing in the dark, appeared to jerk some new recollection out of its place and to jerk some other new recollection into it, and in this state I fell asleep. I was awakened after some time, as I thought, by the stopping of the coach. It was now quite night, and we were at the waterside. There lay here a black boat, with a little house or cabin in it of the same mournful color. When I had taken my seat in this, the boat was paddled by 2 men towards a great light lying in the distance on the sea. Ever and again there was the dismal sigh of wind. It ruffled the water and rocked the boat and sent the dark clouds flying before the stars. I could not but think how strange it was to be floating away at that hour, leaving the land behind, and going on towards this light upon the sea. It soon began to burn brighter, and from being one light became a cluster of tapers, twinkling and shining out of the water, as the boat approached towards them by a dreamy kind of track, marked out upon the sea by posts and piles. We had floated on 5 miles or so over the dark water when I heard it rippling in my dream against some obstruction near at hand. Looking out attentively, I saw through the gloom a something black and massive, like a shore, but lying close and flat upon the water, like a raft, which we were gliding past. The chief of the 2 rowers said it was a burial place. Full of the interest and wonder which a cemetery lying out there in the lonely sea inspired, I turned to gaze upon it as it should recede in our path, when it was quickly shut out from my view. Before I knew by what or how, I found that we were gliding up a street, a phantom street, the houses rising on both sides from the water, and the black boat gliding on beneath their windows. Lights were shining from some of these casements, plumbing the depth of the black stream with their reflected rays, but all was profoundly silent. So we advanced into this ghostly city, continuing to hold our course through narrow streets and lanes, all filled and flowing with water. Some of the corners where our way branched off were so acute and narrow that it seemed impossible for the long, slender boat to turn them, but the rowers, with a low, melodious cry of warning, sent it skimming on without a pause. Sometimes the rowers of another black boat like our own echoed the cry, and slackening their speed, as I thought we did ours, would come flitting past us like a dark shadow. Other boats of the same sombre hue were lying moored, I thought, to painted pillars, near to dark, mysterious doors that opened straight upon the water. Some of these were empty, in some the rowers lay asleep. Towards one I saw some figures coming down a gloomy archway from the interior of a palace, gaily dressed and attended by torch-bearers. It was but a glimpse I had of them, for a bridge so low and close upon the boat that it seemed ready to fall down and crush us, one of the many bridges that perplexed the dream, blotted them out instantly. On we went, floating towards the heart of this strange place, with water all about us where never water was elsewhere. Clusters of houses, churches, heaps of stately buildings growing out of it, and everywhere the same extraordinary silence. Presently we shot across a broad and open stream, and passing, as I thought, before a spacious paved quay, where the bright lamps with which it was illuminated showed long rows of arches and pillars of ponderous construction and great strength, but as light to the eye as garlands of hoarfrost or gossamer, and where for the first time I saw people walking, arrived at a flight of steps leading from the water to a large mansion, where, having passed through corridors and galleries innumerable, I lay down to rest, listening to the black boats stealing up and down below the window on the rippling water, till I fell asleep. The glory of the day that broke upon me in this dream, its freshness, motion, buoyancy, its sparkles of the sun in water, its clear blue sky and rustling air, no waking words can tell. But from my window I looked down on boats and barks, on masts, sails, cordage, flags, on groups of busy sailors working at the cargoes of these vessels, on wide quays strewn with bales, casks, merchandise of many kinds, on great ships lying near at hand in stately indolence, on islands crowned with gorgeous domes and turrets, and where golden crosses glittered in the light, atop of wondrous churches springing from the sea. Going down upon the margin of the green sea, rolling on before the door, and filling all the streets, I came upon a place of such surpassing beauty and such grandeur that all the rest was poor and faded in comparison with its absorbing loveliness. It was the great piazza, as I thought, anchored like all the rest in the deep ocean. On its broad bosom was a palace, more magnificent and majestic in its old age than all the buildings of the earth in the high prime and fullness of their youth. Cloisters and galleries, so light they might have been the work of fairy hands, so strong that centuries had battered them in vain, wound round and round this palace, and enfolded it with a cathedral, gorgeous in the wild, luxuriant fancies of the East. At no great distance from its porch, a lofty tower, standing by itself, and rearing its proud head alone into the sky, looked out upon the Adriatic Sea. Near to the margin of the stream were two ill-omened pillars of red granite, one having on its top a figure with a sword and shield, the other a winged lion. Not far from these again a second tower, richest of the rich in all its decorations, even here where all was rich, sustained aloft a great orb gleaming with gold and deepest blue, the 12 signs painted on it, and a mimic sun revolving in its course around them, while above 2 bronze giants hammered out the hours upon a sounding bell. An oblong square of lofty houses of the whitest stone, surrounded by a light and beautiful arcade, formed part of this enchanted scene, and here and there gay masts for flags rose tapering from the pavement of the unsubstantial ground. I thought I entered the cathedral and went in and out among its many arches, traversing its whole extent. A grand and dreamy structure of immense proportions, golden with old mosaics, redolent of perfumes, dim with the smoke of incense, costly in treasure of precious stones and metals, glittering through iron bars, holy with the bodies of deceased saints, rainbow-hued with windows of stained glass, dark with carved woods and colored marbles, obscure in its vast heights and lengthened distances, shining with silver lamps and winking lights, unreal, fantastic, solemn, inconceivable throughout. I thought I entered the old palace, pacing silent galleries and council chambers, where the old rulers of this mistress of the waters looked sternly out in pictures from the walls, and where her high proud galleys, still victorious on canvas, fought and conquered as of old. I thought I wandered through its halls of state and triumph, bare and empty now, and musing on its pride and might, extinct, for that was past, all past, heard a voice say, some tokens of its ancient rule and some consoling reasons for its downfall may be traced here yet. I dreamed that I was led on, then, into some jealous rooms, communicating with a prison near the palace, separated from it by a lofty bridge crossing a narrow street, and called, I dreamed, the Bridge of Sighs. But first I passed 2 jagged slits in a stone wall, the lion's mouth, now toothless, where in the distempered horror of my sleep I thought denunciations of innocent men to the old wicked council had been dropped through many a time when the night was dark. So when I saw the council room to which such prisoners were taken for examination, and the door by which they passed out when they were condemned, a door that never closed upon a man with life and hope before him, my heart appeared to die within me. It was smitten harder, though, when, torch in hand, I descended from the cheerful day into 2 ranges, one below another, of dismal, awful, horrible stone cells. They were quite dark. Each had a loophole in its massive wall, where in the old time, every day, a torch was placed, I dreamed, to light the prisoner within for half an hour. The captives, by the glimmering of these brief rays, had scratched and cut inscriptions in the blackened vaults. I saw them, for their labor with a rusty nail's point had outlived their agony and them through many generations. One cell I saw in which no man remained for more than 24 hours, being marked for dead before he entered it. Hard by another and a dismal one, whereto at midnight the confessor came, a monk brown-robed and hooded, ghastly in the day and free bright air, but in the midnight of that murky prison, hope's extinguisher and murder's herald. I had my foot upon the spot where at the same dread hour the shriven prisoner was strangled, and struck my hand upon the guilty door, low-browed and stealthy, through which the lumpish sack was carried out into a boat, and rowed away, and drowned where it was death to cast a net. Around this dungeon stronghold, and above some part of it, licking the rough walls without, and smearing them with damp and slime within, stuffing dank weeds and refuse into chinks and crevices, as if the very stones and bars had mouths to stop. furnishing a smooth road for the removal of the bodies of the secret victims of the state, a road so ready that it went along with them and ran before them. Like a cruel officer flowed the same water that filled this dream of mine and made it seem one even at the time. Descending from the palace by a staircase, called, I thought, the Giant's, I had some imaginary recollection of an old man abdicating, coming more slowly and more feebly down it, when he heard the bell, proclaiming his successor. I glided off in one of the dark boats until we came to an old arsenal guarded by 4 marble lions. To make my dream more monstrous and unlikely, one of these had words and sentences upon its body, inscribed there at an unknown time and in an unknown language, so that their purport was a mystery to all men. There was little sound of hammers in this place for building ships, and little work in progress, for the greatness of the city was no more, as I have said. Indeed, it seemed a very wreck found drifting on the sea, a strange flag hoisted in its honorable stations, and strangers standing at its helm. A splendid barge, in which its ancient chief had gone forth pompously at certain periods to wed the ocean, lay here, I thought, no more. But in its place there was a tiny model, made from recollection like the city's greatness, and it told of what had been. So are the strong and weak confounded in the dust, almost as eloquently as the massive pillars, arches, roofs, reared to overshadow stately ships that had no other shadow now upon the water or the earth. An armory was there yet, plundered and despoiled, but an armory, with a fierce standard taken from the Turks, drooping in the dull air of its cage. Rich suits of mail, worn by great warriors, were hoarded there, crossbows and bolts, quivers full of arrows, spears, swords, daggers, maces, shields, and heavy-headed axes, plates of wrought steel and iron to make the gallant horse a monster, cased in metal scales, and one spring weapon, easy to be carried in the breast, designed to do its office noiselessly, and made for shooting men with poisoned darts. One press or case I saw, full of accursed instruments of torture, horribly contrived to cramp and pinch and grind and crush men's bones, and tear and twist them with the torment of 1,000 deaths. Before it were 2 iron helmets with breast-pieces made to close up tight and smooth upon the heads of living sufferers, and fastened onto each was a small knob or anvil, where the directing devil could repose his elbow at his ease and listen near the walled-up ear to the lamentations and confessions of the wretch within. There was that grim resemblance in them to the human shape. They were such molds of sweating faces, pained and cramped, that it was difficult to think them empty, and terrible distortions lingering within them seemed to follow me when, taking to my boat again, I rowed off to a kind of garden or public walk in the sea where there were grass and trees. But I forgot them when I stood upon the farthest brink. I stood there in my dream and looked along the ripple to the setting sun. Before me in the sky and on the deep, a crimson flush, and behind me the whole city resolving into streaks of red and purple on the water. In the luxurious wonder of so rare a dream, I took but little heed of time and had but little understanding of its flight. But there were days and nights in it. And when the sun was high, and when the rays of lamps were crooked in the running water, I was still afloat, I thought, plashing the slippery walls and houses with the cleavings of the tide, as my black boat, borne upon it, skimmed along the streets. Sometimes, alighting at the doors of churches and vast palaces, I wandered on from room to room, from aisle to aisle, through labyrinths of rich altars, ancient monuments, decayed apartments, where the furniture, half awful, half grotesque, was mouldering away. Pictures were there, replete with such enduring beauty and expression, with such passion, truth, and power, that they seemed so many young and fresh realities among a host of spectres. I thought these often intermingled with the old days of the city, with its beauties, tyrants, captains, patriots, merchants, counters, priests, nay, with its very stones and bricks and public places, all of which lived again about me on the walls. Then, coming down some marble staircase where the water lapped and oozed against the lower steps, I passed into my boat again and went on in my dream. Floating down narrow lanes where carpenters at work with plane and chisel in their shops tossed the light shaving straight upon the water, where it lay like weed or ebbed away before me in a tangled heap. Past open doors, decayed and rotten from long steeping in the wet, through which some scanty patch of vine shone green and bright, making unusual shadows on the pavement with its trembling leaves. Past quays and terraces, where women gracefully veiled were passing and repassing, and where idlers were reclining in the sunshine, on flagstones and on flights of steps. Past bridges where there were idlers too, loitering and looking over, below stone balconies erected at a giddy height before the loftiest windows of the loftiest houses. Past plots of garden, theatres, shrines, prodigious piles of architecture, Gothic, Saracenic, fanciful with all the fancies of all times and countries. Past buildings that were high and low and black and white and straight and crooked, mean and grand, crazy and strong, twining among the tangled lot of boats and barges and shooting out at last into the Grand Canal. There, in the errant fancy of my dream, I saw old Shylock passing to and fro upon a bridge, all built upon with shops and humming with the tongues of men, a form I seemed to know for Desdemona's, leaning down through a latticed blind to pluck a flower. And in the dream I thought that Shakespeare's spirit was abroad upon the water somewhere, stealing through the city. At night, when 2 votive lamps burnt before an image of the Virgin in a gallery outside the great cathedral, near the roof, I fancied that the great piazza of the Winged Lion was a blaze of cheerful light, and that its whole arcade was thronged with people, while crowds were diverting themselves in splendid coffee-houses opening from it, which were never shut, I thought, but open all night long. When the bronze giants struck the hour of midnight on the bell, I thought the life and animation of the city were all centered here, and as I rode away abreast the silent quays, I only saw them dotted here and there with sleeping boatmen wrapped up in their cloaks and lying at full length upon the stones. But close about the quays and churches, palaces and prisons sucking at their walls, and welling up into the secret places of the town, crept the water always, noiseless and watchful, coiled round and round it in its many folds, like an old serpent, waiting for the time, I thought, when people should look down into its depths, for any stone of the old city that had claimed to be its mistress. Thus it floated me away until I awoke in the old market-place at Verona. I have many and many a time thought since of this strange dream upon the water, half wondering if it lie there yet, and if its name be Venice. End of An Italian Dream by Charles Dickens.
Alice Pleasance Liddell from Through the Looking-Glass by Lewis Carroll, recorded for Dreams Collection 3 by Peter Yearsley. A boat beneath a sunny sky, lingering onward dreamily in an evening of July. Children 3 that nestle near, eager eye and willing ear, pleased a simple tale to hear. Long has paled that sunny sky, echoes fade and memories die, autumn frosts have slain July. Still she haunts me, phantom-wise, Alice, moving under skies never seen by waking eyes. Children yet the tale to hear, eager eye and willing ear, lovingly shall nestle near. In a wonderland they lie, dreaming as the days go by, dreaming as the summers die. Ever drifting down the stream, lingering in the golden gleam, life, what is it but a dream? End of Alice Pleasance Little by Lewis Carroll. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
A Dream Within a Dream by Edgar Allan Poe, recorded for Dreams Collection 3 by Lee Vogler. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Dream Within a Dream by Edgar Allan Poe. Take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow, you are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope is flown away in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep, while I weep, O God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? O God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? End of A Dream Within a Dream by Edgar Allan Poe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Echo by Christina Rossetti, recorded for Dreams Collection 3 by Lee Vogler. Echo by Christina Rossetti. Come to me in the silence of the night. Come in the speaking silence of a dream. Come with soft, rounded cheeks and eyes as bright as sunlight on a stream. Come back in tears. Oh, memory, hope, love of finished years. Oh, dream, how sweet, too bitter sweet, whose waking should have been in paradise, where souls brimful of love abide and meet, where thirsting, longing eyes watch the slow door that opening, letting in, lets out no more. Yet come to me in dreams that I may live my very life again, though cold in death. Come back to me in dreams that I may give pulse for pulse, breath for breath. Speak low, lean low, as long ago, my love, how long ago? End of Echo by Christina Rossetti. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
A Curious Dream by Mark Twain. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by Paula Messina. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Curious Dream by Mark Twain, containing a moral. Night before last, I had a singular dream. I seemed to be sitting on a doorstep, in no particular city perhaps, ruminating, and the time of night appeared to be about 12 or 1 o'clock. The weather was balmy and delicious. There was no human sound in the air, not even a footstep. There was no sound of any kind to emphasize the dead stillness, except the occasional hollow barking of a dog in the distance, and the fainter answer of a further dog. Presently, up the street, I heard a bony clacking, and guessed it was the castanets of a serenading party. In a minute more, a tall skeleton, hooded and half-clad in a tattered and mouldy shroud, whose shreds were flapping about the ribby lattice-work of its person, swung by me with a stately stride and disappeared in the grey gloom of the starlight. It had a broken and worm-eaten coffin on its shoulder, and a bundle of something in its hand. I knew what the clacking was then. It was this party's joints working together, and his elbows knocking against his sides as he walked. I may say I was surprised. Before I could collect my thoughts and enter upon any speculations as to what this apparition might portend, I heard another one coming, for I recognized his clack. He had 2/3 of a coffin on his shoulder, and some foot and headboards under his arm. I mightily wanted to peer under his hood and speak to him, but when he turned and smiled upon me with his cavernous sockets and his projecting grin as he went by, I thought I would not detain him. He was hardly gone when I heard the clacking again, and another one issued from the shadowy half-light. This one was bending under a heavy gravestone, and dragging a shabby coffin after him by a string. When he got to me, he gave me a steady look for a moment or two, and then rounded to and backed up to me, saying, "Ease this down for a fellow, will you?" I eased the gravestone down till it rested on the ground, and in doing so noticed that it bore the name of John Baxter, Copmanhurst, with May 1839 as the date of his death. Deceased sat wearily down by me, and wiped his os frontis with his major maxillary, chiefly from former habit, I judged, for I could not see that he brought away any perspiration. "It's too bad, said he, drawing the remnant of the shroud about him, and leaning his jaw pensively on his hand. Then he put his left foot up on his knee, and fell to scratching his ankle bone absently with a rusty nail which he got out of his coffin. "What is too bad, friend?" "Oh, everything. I almost wish I never had died." "You surprise me. Why do you say this? Has anything gone wrong? What is the matter?" "Matter? Look at this shroud rags. Look at this gravestone all battered up. Look at that disgraceful old coffin. All a man's property going to ruin and destruction before his eyes, and ask him if anything is wrong? Fire and brimstone." Calm yourself, I said. "It is too bad. It is certainly too bad. But then I had not supposed that you would much mind such matters, situated as you are." "Well, my dear sir, I do mind them. My pride is hurt, and my comfort is impaired, destroyed, I might say. I will state my case. I will put it to you in such a way that you can comprehend it, if you will let me," said the poor skeleton, tilting the hood of his shroud back, as if he were clearing for action, and thus unconsciously giving himself a jaunty and festive air, very much at variance with the grave character of his position in life, so to speak, and in prominent contrast with his distressful mood. "Proceed," said I. "I reside in the shameful old graveyard a block or two above you here. In this street, there now. I just expected that cartilage would let go. 3rd rib from the bottom, friend. Hitch that end of it to my spine with the string, if you have got such a thing about you, though a bit of silver wire is a deal pleasanter and more durable and becoming, if one keeps it polished. To think of shredding out and going to pieces in this way, just on account of the indifference and neglect of one's posterity." And the poor ghost grated his teeth in a way that gave me a wrench and a shiver, for the effect is mightily increased by the absence of muffling flesh and cuticle. "I reside in that old graveyard, and have for these 30 years, And I tell you, things are changed since I first laid this old tired frame there and turned over and stretched out for a long sleep, with a delicious sense upon me of being done with bother and grief and anxiety and doubt and fear forever and ever, and listening with comfortable and increasing satisfaction to the sexton's work, from the startling clatter of his first spadeful on my coffin till it dulled away to the faint padding that shaped the roof of my new home. Delicious! My, I wish you could try it tonight. And out of my reverie deceased fetched me a rattling slap with a bony hand. Yes, sir, 30 years ago I laid me down there and was happy, for it was out in the country then, out in the breezy, flowery, grand old woods, and the lazy winds gossiped with the leaves, and the squirrels capered over us and around us, and the creeping things visited us, and the birds filled the tranquil solitude with music. Why, it was worth 10 years of a man's life to be dead then. Everything was pleasant. I was in a good neighborhood, for all the dead people that lived near me belonged to the best families in the city. Our posterity appeared to think the world of us. They kept our graves in the very best condition. The fences were always in faultless repair. Headboards were kept painted or whitewashed, and were replaced with new ones as soon as they began to look rusty or decayed. Monuments were kept upright, railings intact and bright, the rose bushes and shrubbery trimmed, trained, and free from blemish, the walks clean and smooth and gravelled. But that day is gone by. Our descendants have forgotten us. My grandson lives in a stately house built with money made by these old hands of mine, and I sleep in a neglected grave with invading vermin that gnaw my shroud to build them nests withal. I and friends that lie with me founded and secured the prosperity of this fine city, and the stately bantling of our loves leaves us to rot in a dilapidated cemetery which neighbors curse and strangers scoff at. See the difference between the old time and this. For instance, our graves are all caved in now, our headboards have rotted away and tumbled down, our railings reel this way and that, with one foot in the air after a fashion of unseemly levity. Our monuments lean wearily, and our gravestones bow their heads discouraged. There be no adornments any more. No roses, nor shrubs, nor gravelled walks, nor anything that is a comfort to the eye. And even the paintless old board fence that did make a show of holding us sacred from companionship with beasts and the defilement of heedless feet has tottered till it overhangs the street, and only advertises the presence of our dismal resting place, and invites yet more derision to it. And now we cannot hide our poverty and tatters in the friendly woods, for the city has stretched its withering arms abroad and taken us in, and all that remains of the chair of our old home is the cluster of lugubrious forest trees that stand, bored and weary of a city life, with their feet in our coffins, looking into the hazy distance and wishing they were there. I tell you, it is disgraceful. You begin to comprehend, you begin to see how it is. While our descendants are living sumptuously on our money right around us in the city, we have to fight hard to keep skull and bones together. Bless you, there isn't a grave in our cemetery that doesn't leak. Not one. Every time it rains in the night, we have to climb out and roost in the trees. And sometimes we are wakened suddenly by the chilly water trickling down the back of our necks. Then I tell you, there is a general heaving up of old graves and kicking over of old monuments and scampering of old skeletons for the trees. Bless me, if you had gone along there some such nights after 12, you might have seen as many as 15 of us roosting on one limb, with our joints rattling drearily and the wind wheezing through our ribs. Many a time we have perched there for 3 or 4 dreary hours and then come down, stiff and chilled through and drowsy, and borrowed each other's skulls to bail out our graves with. If you will glance up in my mouth now as I tilt my head back, you can see that my headpiece is half full of old dry sediment. How top-heavy and stupid it makes me sometimes. Yes, sir. Many a time, if you happened to come along just before dawn, you'd have caught us bailing out the graves and hanging our shrouds on the fence to dry. Why, I had an elegant shroud stolen from there one morning. Think a party by the name of Smith took it, that resides in a plebeian graveyard over yonder. I think so, because the first time I ever saw him, he hadn't anything on but a check shirt. And the last time I saw him, which was at a social gathering in the new cemetery, he was the best-dressed corpse in the company, and it is a significant fact that he left when he saw me. And presently an old woman from here missed her coffin. She generally took it with her when she went anywhere, because she was liable to take cold and bring on the spasmodic rheumatism that originally killed her if she exposed herself to the night air much. She was named Hotchkiss, Anna Matilda Hotchkiss. You might know her. She has 2 upper front teeth, is tall, but a good deal inclined to stoop, 1 rib on the left side gone, has 1 shred of rusty hair hanging from the left side of her head, and 1 little tuft just above and a little forward of her right ear. Has her underjaw wired on one side where it had worked loose. Small bone of left forearm gone, lost in a fight. Has a kind of swagger in her gait and a gallus way of going with her arms akimbo and her nostrils in the air. Has been pretty free and easy, and is all damaged and battered up till she looks like a queensware crate in ruins. Maybe you have met her. God forbid, I involuntarily ejaculated, for somehow I was not looking for that form of question, and it caught me a little off my guard. But I hastened to make amends for my rudeness and say, I simply meant I had not had the honor, for I would not deliberately speak discourteously of a friend of yours. You were saying that you were robbed, and it was a shame, too. But it appears by what is left of the shroud you have on that it was a costly one in its day. How did... A most ghastly expression began to develop among the decayed features and shriveled integuments of my guest's face, and I was beginning to grow uneasy and distressed, when he told me he was only working up a deep, sly smile, with a wink in it, to suggest that about the time he acquired his present garment, a ghost in a neighboring cemetery missed one. This reassured me, but I begged him to confine himself to speech thenceforth, because his facial expression was uncertain. Even with the most elaborate care, it was liable to misfire. Smiling should especially be avoided. What he might honestly consider a shining success was likely to strike me in a very different light. I said I liked to see a skeleton cheerful, even decorously playful, but I did not think smiling was a skeleton's best hold. Yes, friend, said the poor skeleton, the facts are just as I have given them to you. 2 of these old graveyards, The one that I resided in, and one further along, have been deliberately neglected by our descendants of today, until there is no occupying them any longer, aside from the osteological discomfort of it. And that is no light matter this rainy weather. The present state of things is ruinous to property. We have got to move or be content to see our effects wasted away and utterly destroyed. Now you will hardly believe it, but it is true, nevertheless, that there isn't a single coffin in good repair among all my acquaintance. Now that is an absolute fact. I do not refer to low people who come in a pine box mounted on an express wagon, but I am talking about your high-toned, silver-mounted burial case, your monumental sort, that travel under black plumes at the head of a procession and have choice of cemetery lots. I mean folks like the Jarvises and the Bledsoes and Burlings and such. They are all about ruined. The most substantial people in our set they were. And now look at them, utterly used up and poverty-stricken. One of the Bledsoes actually traded his monument to a late barkeeper for some fresh shavings to put under his head. I tell you it speaks volumes, for there is nothing a corpse takes so much pride in as his monument. He loves to read the inscription. He comes after a while to believe what it says himself. And then you may see him sitting on the fence night after night enjoying it. Epitaphs are cheap, and they do a poor chap a world of good after he is dead, especially if he had hard luck while he was alive. I wish they were used more. No, I don't complain, but confidentially, I do think it was a little shabby in my descendants to give me nothing but this old slab of a gravestone, and all the more that there isn't a compliment on it. It used to have "Gone to his just reward" on it, and I was proud when I first saw it. But by and by I noticed that whenever an old friend of mine came along, he would hook his chin on the railing and pull a long face and read along down till he came to that. Then he would chuckle to himself and walk off, looking satisfied and comfortable. So I scratched it off to get rid of those fools. But a dead man always takes a deal of pride in his monument. Yonder goes half a dozen of the Jarvises now, with the family monument along, and Smithers and some hired spectres went by with his a while ago. Hello, Higgins. Goodbye, old friend. That's Meredith Higgins. Died in 44. Belongs to our set in the cemetery. Fine old family. Great-grandmother was an Injun. I am on the most familiar terms with him. He didn't hear me was the reason he didn't answer me, and I am sorry, too, because I would have liked to introduce you. You would admire him. He is the most disjointed, sway-backed, and generally distorted old skeleton you ever saw. But he is full of fun. When he laughs, it sounds like rasping two stones together. And he always starts it off with a cheery screech like raking a nail across a window pane. Hey, Jones! That is old Columbus Jones. Shroud cost $400. Entire trousseau, including monument, $2,700. This was in the spring of 26. It was enormous style for those days. Dead people came all the way from the Alleghenies to see his things. The party that occupied the grave next to mine remembers it well. Now do you see that individual going along with a piece of a headboard under his arm? One leg bone below his knee gone, and not a thing in the world on. That is Barstow Dalhousie, and next to Columbus Jones, he was the most sumptuously outfitted person that ever entered our cemetery. We are all leaving. We cannot tolerate the treatment we are receiving at the hands of our descendants. They open new cemeteries, but they leave us to our ignominy. They mend the streets, but they never mend anything that is about us or belongs to us. Look at that coffin of mine. Yet I tell you, in its day, it was a piece of furniture that would have attracted attention in any drawing room in this city. You may have it if you want it. I can't afford to repair it. Put a new bottom in her, and part of a new top, and a bit of fresh lining along the left side, and you'll find her about as comfortable as any receptacle of her species you ever tried. No, thanks, no, don't mention it. You've been civil to me, and I would give you all the property I have got before I would seem ungrateful. Now this winding sheet is a kind of sweet thing in its way. If you would like to... No? Well, just as you say, but I wished to be fair and liberal. There's nothing mean about me. Goodbye, friend. I must be going. I may have a good way to go tonight. Don't know. I only know one thing for certain, and that is that I am on the emigrant trail now, and I'll never sleep in that crazy old cemetery again. I will travel till I find respectable quarters, if I have to hoof it to New Jersey. All the boys are going. It was decided in public conclave last night to emigrate, and by the time the sun rises there won't be a bone left in our old habitations. Such cemeteries may suit my surviving friends, but they do not suit the remains that have the honor to make these remarks. My opinion is the general opinion. If you doubt it, go and see how the departing ghosts upset things before they started. They were almost riotous in their demonstrations of distaste. Hello, here are some of the Bledsoes. And if you will give me a lift with this tombstone, I guess I will join company and jog along with them. Mighty respectable old family, the Bledsoes, and used to always come out in 6-horse hearses and all that sort of thing 50 years ago, when I walked these streets in daylight. Goodbye, friend. And with his gravestone on his shoulder, he joined the grisly procession, dragging his damaged coffin after him. For notwithstanding he pressed it upon me so earnestly, I utterly refused his hospitality. I suppose that for as much as 2 hours these sad outcasts went clacking by, laden with their dismal effects, and all that time I sat pitying them. 1 or 2 of the youngest and least dilapidated among them inquired about midnight trains on the railways, but the rest seemed unacquainted with that mode of travel, and merely asked about common public roads to various towns and cities, some of which are not on the map now, and vanished from it and from the earth as much as 30 years ago, and some few of them never had existed anywhere but on maps, and private ones in real estate agencies at that. And they asked about the condition of the cemeteries in these towns and cities, and about the reputation the citizens bore as to reverence for the dead. This whole matter interested me deeply, and likewise compelled my sympathy for these homeless ones, and it all seeming real, and I not knowing it was a dream. I mentioned to one shrouded wanderer an idea that had entered my head to publish an account of this curious and very sorrowful exodus, but said also that I could not describe it truthfully and just as it occurred, without seeming to trifle with a grave subject and exhibit an irreverence for the dead that would shock and distress their surviving friends. But this bland and stately remnant of a former citizen leaned him far over my gate and whispered in my ear and said, "Do not let that disturb you. The community that can stand such graveyards as those we are emigrating from can stand anything a body can say about the neglected and forsaken dead that lie in them." At that very moment a cock crowed, and the weird procession vanished and left not a shred or a bone behind. I awoke and found myself lying with my head out of the bed and sagging downward considerably, a position favorable to dreaming dreams with morals in them, maybe, but not poetry. Note, the reader is assured that if the cemeteries in his town are kept in good order, This dream is not leveled at his town at all, but is leveled particularly and venomously at the next town. End of A Curious Dream by Mark Twain.
Nebuchadnezzar's Dream by Moses. Recorded for Dreams Collection No. 3 by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. American Standard Version of the Old Testament, Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar's Dream. And in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamt dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep went from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the enchanters, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamt a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in the Syrian language, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The thing is gone from me. If you make not known unto me the dream, and the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream, and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream, and the interpretation thereof. They answered the 2nd time, and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that ye would gain time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if ye make not known unto me the dream, there is but one law for you, for ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter, forasmuch as no king, lord, or ruler hath asked such a thing of any magician, or enchanter, or Chaldean. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is no other that can show it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth, and the wise men were to be slain, and they sought Daniel and his companions to be slain. Then Daniel returned to answer with counsel and prudence to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who was gone forth to slay wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Wherefore is the decree so urgent from the king? And Arioch made the thing known unto Daniel. And Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would appoint him a time, and he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they should desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his companions should know or perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God for ever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that have understanding. He revealeth the deep and the secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast now made known unto me what we desired of thee, for thou hast made known unto us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the children of the captivity of Judah, that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered before the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded can neither wise men, enchanters, magicians, nor soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and he hath made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets hath made known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but to the intent that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that thou mayest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This image, which was mighty and whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the aspect thereof was terrible. As for the image, its head was of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of brass, its legs of iron, its feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet that were made of iron and clay, and brake them unto pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken into pieces together, and became like the chaff on the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art King of kings, unto whom the God of heaven hath given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. And wheresoever the children of men shall dwell, the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens hath he given into thy hand, and hath made thee to rule over them all. Thou art the head of gold. And after thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that crusheth all these, shall it break into pieces and crush. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron doth not mingle with clay. And in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall the sovereignty thereof be left to another people. But it shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Forasmuch as thou sawest that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake into pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, and the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou hast been able to reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel great, and gave him many great gifts, and made him to rule over the whole province of Babylon, and to be chief governor over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel requested of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel was in the gate of the king. End of Nebuchadnezzar's dream.
The End of the World, A Dream, by Ivan Turgenev. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by Claudia Caldi. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The End of the World, A Dream, by Ivan Turgenev. I fancied I was somewhere in Russia, in the wilds, in a simple country house. The room big and low-pitched with 3 windows, the walls whitewashed, no furniture. Before the house a barren plain. Gradually sloping downwards, it stretches into the distance. A grey monotonous sky hangs over it, like the canopy of a bed. I'm not alone. There are some 10 persons in the room with me, all quite plain people, simply dressed. They walk up and down in silence, as it were stealthily. They avoid one another, and yet are continually looking anxiously at one another. Not one knows why he has come into this house, and what people there are with him. On all the faces, uneasiness and despondency. All in turn approach the windows and look about intently, as though expecting something from without. Then again they fall to wandering up and down. Among us is a small-sized boy. From time to time he whimpers in the same thin voice, "Father, I'm frightened." My heart turns sick at his whimper, and I too begin to be afraid. Of what? I don't know myself. Only I feel there is coming nearer and nearer a great, great calamity. The boy keeps on and on with his wail. Oh, to escape from here! How stifling, how weary, how heavy! But escape is impossible. That sky is like a shroud, and no wind. Is the air dead, or what? All at once the boy runs up to the window and shrieks in the same piteous voice, "Look, look! The earth has fallen away!" How? Fallen away? Yes, just now there was a plain before the house, and now it stands on a fearful height. The horizon has sunk, has gone down, and from the very house drops an almost overhanging, as it were scooped out, black precipice. We all crowded to the window. Horror froze our hearts. "Here it is, here it is," whispers one next to me. And behold, along the whole far boundary of the earth, something began to stir. Some sort of small, roundish hillocks began heaving and falling. It is the sea! The thought flashed on us all at the same instant. It will swallow us all up directly. Only how can it grow and rise upwards to this precipice? And yet it grows enormously. Already there are not separate hillocks heaving in the distance. One continuous, monstrous wave embraces the whole circle of the horizon. It is swooping down upon us. In an icy hurricane it flies, swirling in the darkness of hell. Everything shuddered. And there in this flying mass was the crash of thunder, the iron wail of thousands of throats. Ah, what a roaring and moaning! It was the earth howling for terror. The end of it, the end of all. The child whimpered once more. I tried to clutch at my companions, but already we were all crushed, buried, drowned, swept away by that pitch-black, icy, thundering wave. Darkness, darkness everlasting. Scarcely breathing, I awoke. March 1878. End of the World, A Dream, by Ivan Turgenev.
Kubla Khan, or A Vision in a Dream, a fragment by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, recorded for Dreams Collection No. 3 by Algy Pug. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The following fragment is here published at the request of a poet of great and deserved celebrity, Lord Byron, and as far as the author's own opinions are concerned, rather as a psychological curiosity than on the ground of any supposed poetic merits. In the summer of the year 1797, the author, then in ill health, had retired to a lonely farmhouse between Porlock and Linton, on the Exmoor confines of Somerset and Devonshire. In consequence of a slight indisposition, an anodyne had been prescribed, from the effects of which he fell asleep in his chair at the moment that he was reading the following sentence, or words of the same substance, in Porteus's Pilgrimage. Here the Kubla Khan commanded a palace to be built, and a stately garden thereunto, and thus 10 miles of fertile ground were enclosed with a wall. The author continued for about 3 hours in a profound sleep, at least of the external senses, during which time he has the most vivid confidence that he could not have composed less than from 200 to 300 lines, if that indeed can be called composition, in which all the images rose up before him as things, with a parallel production of the correspondent expressions, without any sensation or consciousness of effort. On awaking, he appeared to himself to have a distinct recollection of the whole, and taking his pen, ink, and paper, instantly and eagerly wrote down the lines that are here preserved. At this moment he was, unfortunately, called out by a person on business from Porlock, and detained by him above an hour, and on his return to his room found, to his no small surprise and mortification, that though he still retained some vague and dim recollection of the general purport of the vision, yet, with the exception of some 8 or 10 scattered lines and images, all the rest had passed away like the images on the surface of a stream into which a stone has been cast, but, alas, without the after restoration of the latter. Then all the charm is broken, all that phantom world so fair vanishes, and 1,000 circlets spread, and each misshapes the other. Stay awhile, poor youth, who scarcely darest lift up thine eyes. The stream will soon renew its smoothness, soon the visions will return. And lo, he stays, and soon the fragments dim of lovely forms come trembling back, unite, and now once more the pool becomes a mirror. from The Picture, or The Lover's Resolution, Part 2, lines 91 to 100. Yet, from the still surviving recollections in his mind, the author has frequently purposed to finish for himself what had been originally, as it were, given to him. But the tomorrow is yet to come. As a contrast to this vision, I have annexed a fragment of a very different character, describing with equal fidelity the dream of pain and disease. Kubla Khan. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan the stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers, were girdled round. And there were gardens, bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests, ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover! A savage place, as holy and enchanted as e'er beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half-intermitted burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks, at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river. 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion, through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. In a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, "Beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair! Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise." 1798. End of Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Wonderful Thing by Henry S. Whitehead. Read for Dream Collection 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. The Wonderful Thing by Henry S. Whitehead. A Dream Story. None of his acquaintances would have had the face to call Mr. James O'Hara a dreamer. In Zachary Taylor's day, that was as much a term of reproach as it is today, as it was in the time of Joseph. He was just 24 when he elected, after due conference and counsel had been taken, to leave the paternal home in Newark, New Jersey, for seeking one's fortune was in the air, even 7 years before the California gold strike began to strew on the transcontinental routes the long lines of bleaching bones which have been there ever since. Unlike most, Mr. O'Hara did not go west. Instead, he went into Connecticut, which was a prudent decision, however little it might promise adventure. Just then, in Connecticut, there were opportunities for a skillful land surveyor and engineer without the necessity of braving the wilderness with a pair of derringers. He traveled from Peck's Slip by the Hartford Packet, and early the next morning, up on the forward deck, with swirling mist dissipating itself in curling wisps as it faded into the mellow crispness of a July morning, the soft greenery of the gentle hills above the Narrows Gorge, just below Middleton, caught his fancy, and it was at Middleton, instead of Hartford, that he disembarked among the fertile farms of that good bottom land. He had no intention, though, of delving into the land for a living. His work lay on the surface, measuring rods, perches, and poles for other people. Mr. O'Hara obtained a small house at a bargain on High Street, near the Wesleyan College, and shortly, on the strength of his gilt-edged recommendations, steady employment on the new Central Vermont Railway east of the river, a solid, permanent, and highly paid piece of work after his own heart. For his household he secured the services of Abel and Judy, once tobacco-field slaves, and Judy cooked, while old Abel pitted his everlasting miseries against serving Mr. O'Hara's meals when he was at home, and toting the fireplace logs when advancing autumn claimed its toll of firewood. Mr. O'Hara's professional duties took so much of his time that he had had little time for social intercourse with the Middletown gentry, and beyond an occasional afternoon spent in Westfield or Walnut Grove with his fowling piece after ruffed grouse or quail, he had seen little of the lovely country to the north, west, and south of Middletown. He had never, for example, penetrated as far as Durham, among its foothills to the west, until he went there by the imaginative route of his great dream. He had been wakeful one night, puzzling out a way to save his employers as much as possible on bridging a tumbling trout stream, and it was very late when he fell asleep. He dreamed with a clearness he had never known before in a mere dream, as he told himself afterward many times. And the dream began with his breakfast. He could hear old Abel muttering to himself behind the kitchen door as he ate. Judy must have been blowing him up harder than usual, he thought, and smiled to himself at their odd ways. He would give Abel a half-twist of tobacco for solace. He was aware that he had taken this day off from work across the river. This was in fact a very extra special kind of day. Shortly, as soon as breakfast was over, he would be going upstairs again, and titivating himself in a more than ordinary toilet. Great things were afoot. He had decided, he knew, upon his second-best pair of nankeen trousers, those which had the pigskin straps, as being somewhat better made than his very newest pair, and these were now lying, carefully folded and brushed, across the straight back of a chair in his dressing-room. He finished his breakfast leisurely, and then mounted the stairs and dressed himself very carefully. He polished the outer case of his globular Rent-Now watch, and tightened those pigskin trouser straps a hole tighter before drawing them on over his shining boots. Ah, that was it, as if he had been melted and run into them. With a large silk handkerchief, he polished the gleaming surface of his beaver hat until it glistened like the coat of Sally, his saddle-mare. He brushed his thick black hair carefully and turned the edges forward in a sweep above his shapely ears. Finally, most delicate task of all, he held his breath and tied his cravat. Then he pulled smartly together the lapels of his fine broadcloth coat and descended. He mounted Sally at the door, Abel grinning from ear to ear to see the master so splendidly groomed this morning, and set out, Sally caracoling upon his way to Durham. He rode slowly, along a road still thick with summer's dust, a road scented with the almost sickly sweet of the maturing hardhack and the occasional head-turning breath of fox grapes. He noted pleasantly every rabbit that darted across his path. He smiled amusedly at the strutting purple grackles like diminutive crows infesting the newly cleared cornfields. As he passed through shaded bits where woodlots hemmed the road, grouse drummed boomingly in the thickets. It seemed to him as if he were traveling this road after many and many a previous journey, and that a tryst lay ahead. At high noon he entered the Durham village High Street, through straggling shanties and outhouses at its beginning, where some elderly blacks, like Abel and Judy, were engaged in clearing the interminable cornfields. Then he passed row after row of great, gaunt tobacco barns. Last came the more pretentious and decorative dwellings of Main Street. Past all these familiar places the young man rode blithely, along the side of the road where the deep dust lay somewhat less chokingly thick. At last he drew rein and dismounted before the very finest of the Main Street dwellings, quite a mansion, with fluted Grecian pillars fronting a broad porch, and he tied Sally to an iron hitching post with a horse's head atop, one of those the Douglas Pump Works in Middletown was beginning to supply to the more aesthetic-minded of its clients. He opened the gate, not without some emotional flutterings in the region of his broad chest, and approached the house along a flagged walk with its stones set wide apart and the grass between neatly sickle-shorn. The gate waited with an iron melon, also a product of the pump works, shut to behind him with a smart click, and he raised his eyes to the porch. Thereon was a lady, her banded hair low over her ears, herself swathed in summery flowered muslin. She laid down, as she rose to greet Mr. O'Hara, the current Godey's Lady's Book, and then she walked with little steps, her crinolines billowing gracefully, along the porch to meet her approaching cavalier. Mr. O'Hara bowed from the waist, his beaver hat held smartly in his left hand, the fingers of his right extended fan-like on his breast. The lovely lady curtsied discreetly. In this porticoed house Mr. O'Hara knew himself to be on a footing of delightful intimacy. Here were good friends. He followed the lady along the porch into the shade of a thick honeysuckle vine, now gemmed with noon's quota of belated hummingbirds darting like jeweled bees through the vine-laden, yet with summer's sweetness. The two seated themselves a little ceremoniously side by side, and looked long and ardently into each other's eyes. Mr. O'Hara broke the silence. He spoke very softly. "You had my letter, Edith?" "Yes." The lovely lady's eyes sought the ground. Her little foot tapped. A wave of lovely color began to suffuse her face. Mr. O'Hara took her slender hand in his. She left it there. He sighed deeply. This was a sign. "Then you will, dear?" Mr. O'Hara liked her answer better than if it had been in words. She merely inclined her head upon the ruffle of his cambric shirt. As fine a shirt, be it known, as any Lawyer Burnham Pease, the dandy of Middletown, could boast. Mr. O'Hara placed his good right arm very tenderly about her very slim waist, and this movement causing her head to turn very slightly towards him, he leaned forward respectfully, almost as if there were something sacramental about what he was doing, and kissed her on the lips. Then, very gently it seemed to him as he dreamed, he released her, released his affianced bride, for such now was the lovely lady by virtue of her tacit acceptance of his written proposal for her hand, and rising, they proceeded into the house. There followed midday dinner, to which feast Mr. O'Hara, it seemed, had been duly invited beforehand. And Edith's father took Mr. O'Hara by the hand and shook it approvingly, and Edith's mother had fetched from a cool cupboard a slim bottle of cowslip wine, and everything was glorious and delightful and wholly satisfying in that most satisfactory of imaginable dreams. Mr. O'Hara stayed quite a long time after dinner, too, it seemed to him. He started homeward about 4 o'clock. He rode, as it were, on air, and gentle Sally paced charmingly in a way she had at particular times, and so did not disturb his thoughts. But as they were emerging from the last of the dwellings along the Durham village street, just as they were about to enter upon that stretch of their journey which was bounded by the plantations before they should plunge abruptly into the cool greenery of woods, Sally, ambling quietly, struck her hoof against a rounded pebble and stumbled. And young Mr. James O'Hara, sharply awaking at the shock, found himself sitting bolt upright in his own bed. It was like a sudden emergence into a strange world. The details of his familiar surroundings seemed very dim to him as he rubbed his eyes and looked about in the pale moonlight coldly flooding the room, and they took a long time to assume their proper place in his waking understanding. For there was a breath of honeysuckle somewhere, and a great and abiding happiness suffused his whole being. Then, as facts in the shape of the highboy across the room and the stark bedposts replaced gradually the shimmering glory of that ride to Durham village, and he passed the point where he had reluctantly to admit to himself that this was reality, that other only a dream, the young man was puzzled to find how largely bewilderment and annoyance bulked in his thoughts. He rose out of bed, much troubled, and lit first a candle and then a cigar. He pulled on a dressing gown and slippers, sat down in a chair, and tried to think. It seemed even then curious to him, but the incidents of that dream were all clear-cut like cameos. They did not fade out of his mind as the material of which dreams are made fades commonly. They were all precisely as if it had been a real happening, just passed through and not a dream at all. Another circumstance puzzled him exceedingly. The dream had begun in the midst of a fairly long and very intimate acquaintance with this family in Durham. Their name was Foote. That he knew, but he was certain that the name had not once been mentioned during the course of his imaginary visit. He knew, too, exactly what had been in that letter about which he had asked her on his arrival. He put himself back, it was quite easy, into the atmosphere of the dream, and so musing he could even remember writing the letter. More dimly, previous visits, many of these. But thinking now of this remarkable occurrence with a cool draught on his bare ankles to remind him that he was awake here in his room, he knew that it was only a fabric woven of moonshine. Very lovely, very beautiful moonshine. He was not engaged to be married. He had not drunk 3 slender glasses of cowslip wine. He had never been within 3 miles of Durham in his life. Of course, there had been no letter, no previous visits. There were no such people as the Footes. Edith did not exist. His Edith. She would always, that he knew more clearly than anything else, have his heart. His heart held delicately between her slender hands. The figment of his imagination, a girl of gossamer. Young Mr. James O'Hara, practical land surveyor, took his puzzled head between his 2 hands and groaned. Then, realizing that this was moon madness, he gathered as best he could his scattered wits, and viciously hurling the blackened corpse of his cigar into the grate, he blew out the candle and tumbled warily back into bed. There were no psychoanalysts in 1842 to reassure people about their dreams. That the dream, as these allege, is always the expression of the wish, was a doctrine which Mr. O'Hara had never heard. And even if he had heard of it, he was possessed of too much Celtic common sense to take comfort in anything of the kind. For the first time in his life he discovered himself, who should be immersed in the intricacies of costs and parabolas and tangents and bridge building, caught instead in the chain of love for a phantom. It was sheerly maddening. Had ever blameless young man been so afflicted? Seeking antidote, Mr. O'Hara plunged with driven energy into his work, but even this eminently sensible course did him no good. He called himself names. He even swore at himself. The alternatives of tavern whiskey and suicide did, it must be admitted, cross his mind. So hard was he hit with this deadly weapon forged of love and moonlight and the smell of a honeysuckle vine. For 3 bitter weeks he found no respite. He bore his trouble grimly, with teeth set, as his ancestors had fought their battles. But he lost weight, and a few faint lines began to appear in his face. Then one morning, late in October, when the leaves had all turned and were making a glory of the woods, one blessed morning, he woke up free. The terrible incubus of that despairing grief had lifted itself from him, and he rose out of sleep and out of his bed with a song on his lips. Gone were his pain and care. His obsession had left him. As he dressed, he remembered it for the first time, and the remembrance brought a twinge. But it was a twinge merely of remembrance. There was none of the almost physical agony which had accompanied his every waking moment those 3 weeks gone. He descended to breakfast with a tune lilting on his lips, and so grateful was he to the unknown power that had freed him and given him instead this unaccountable gaiety, that he did not even try to fathom it or to analyze what had happened to him. There was biscuit and honey for breakfast, and bacon and crisply fried thin slices of fresh calf's liver. It was the bacon and liver which reminded him of something vaguely joyful with which it was somehow associated. Suddenly, he remembered. There had been biscuit and honey, and calf's liver, and bacon for breakfast, here in this room on the morning of that dream, when he had sat cogitating about the second-best pair of nankeen trousers. Suddenly he paused. He was listening to hear if Abel would be muttering, as he had that morning, behind the kitchen door. He heard it, and little cold chills ran up and down his back. Here were 3 separate and distinct indications: the unaccountable gaiety of his rising, which was precisely the way he had felt. Did he not remember every tiny incident and emotion of that dream on that morning? Second, the breakfast. It was precisely what Judy had sent in then. Third, Abel's grumbling. He called Abel and inquired what had disturbed him. It was Judy's nagging. Judy said Abel was getting worse and worse all the time. Some day, well, she'd see. "There's a half-twist of tobacco for you," said Mr. O'Hara. Abel grinned broadly, his troubles already forgotten. Then a good-sized chill taking possession of his back. "Saddle Sally. Give her an extra special rub with a handful of clean straw. Have her at the front door at 11. Abel departed, his grin still evident. Mr. O'Hara rose and got out the half-twist of tobacco. He mounted slowly to his room. He sat down in a chair and tried to think. Running through his head, and not to be ignored, was the thought of the ride he was going to take that morning. He would tempt fortune. He would go a-larking in his quest of his will-o'-the-wisp. He would follow, as far as it led him, the road of the dream. The first few rods of it were plain, anyhow. It simply followed High Street to the corner and turned up Washington. After he had got that far, he would see. He needed a day off from his work anyhow. That was days and days ahead of the schedule. He earned his big salary, did Mr. James O'Hara. Humming a tune, he started in with a leather-backed clothes brush on that second-best pair of nankeen trousers. When he had got some distance up Washington Street, farther than he had ever been before in that direction, the chills took possession of him a third time that morning. For here was a turning, and Sally took it almost without pressure on the bridle rein. It was the first of the turns of his dream road. He rode on. He noted rabbits scurrying across the road, the purple grackles strutting in the cornfields. Even an occasional ruffed grouse, drumming abruptly, caused gentle Sally to prick up her ears anxiously. From time to time, that little creeping chill would run up and down his spine, and he would have to look about him hard at this object or that, or stoop forward to pat Sally's curving sorrel neck to reassure himself that this time he was awake. He passed slow-footed Negroes clearing the very last gleanings from the cornfields. Slowly he rode on through the plantations, out of the cool woods, past the shanties at the village's edge, then on through the rows of increasingly comely dwelling-houses. He urged Sally gently over to the roadside, where the impalpable dust lay less thick than in the middle. When at last Sally, again almost without urging, turned in before a dignified white porticoed house, well back from the hot road, and with white Grecian pillars before its broad veranda, he did not dare to look at it squarely, and he was stiff and trembling like a leaf when, by the force of sheer willpower, he dismounted, and began with fumbling, shaking fingers to tie Sally to the ornamental iron horse-post with a horse's head atop, which stood before the picket gate. Sally nuzzled his hand with her soft lips, as if she understood dimly what ailed her master. Then leaving Sally and walking almost drunkenly, every nerve in his body jingling, he forced himself to the gate and pushed it open. It swung shut behind him, impelled by the weight of an iron melon hung in the middle of a chain. The gate shut with a sharp snick. That brought him up and served to pull him together a little. He was actually here. The chills seemed to recede a little. He held up his head as an O'Hara should at all times, and stepped almost jauntily along a flagged path, the stones well apart, the grass between neatly trimmed. Almost before he knew it, he was close to the house. He looked closely at the porch. He saw a lady, her face like chalk, rise unsteadily from a chair at the far end. He could not see her face clearly, for her outline was somewhat obscured by a thick honeysuckle vine, which grew all over that end of the porch. She was laying down something about the size and appearance of a magazine. Summery light muslin billowed gracefully about her as she leaned for support against the nearest fluted pillar. The lady turned terrified eyes in Mr. O'Hara's direction, and his heart stopped beating, and then, very slowly, he thought, resumed. He snatched off his beaver, and his forehead suddenly felt cold despite the sweat which streamed down his face and into his eyes. He clicked his heels together and bowed, his hat in his left hand, his right trembling against his breast, the fingers fan-shaped, beating like castanets against the full ruffle of his fine cambric shirt. Trembling again now, as if with an ague, his face set, the breath hissing through his dry lips and between his set teeth, he mounted the steps. The lady still leaned against her column, her face deathlike in its stricken pallor. Stiffly, Mr. O'Hara walked the length of the veranda, reached out, and took her hand in his trembling fingers. It felt like ice, and commiseratingly he closed his strong hand about it. The lady made no effort to withdraw it. Twice he tried to speak, but the words caught in his dry throat. Then, grimly licking his lips to moisten them, he managed to croak, "Edith." He felt that he had shouted, but only the faintest whisper emerged upon the quiet, warm air. The lady's light grasp tightened convulsively on Mr. O'Hara's hand. "James," she breathed, and with a great effort raised her head and looked into his eyes. Mr. O'Hara saw the terror in hers dissolve, to be replaced by another look which he never forgot. She never told him, then or later, what she thought she saw in his. Mr. O'Hara delicately, respectfully, almost apologetically placed his arms supportingly about the lady's slender waist. I dreamed of you," he muttered. "And I of you." The words were just audible. The lady's eyes seemed to Mr. O'Hara to grow very dark and deep and tender. 3 weeks ago," said she. 3 weeks ago," repeated Mr. O'Hara. "On Wednesday night." "On Wednesday night." In a muse, Mr. O'Hara gently disengaged his arm, and the lady sank into a seat. He seated himself beside her, and in a voice which, as he proceeded, gradually assumed its ordinary inflections, told her of his dream, to the accompaniment of many little nods of comprehension and corroboration, wondering looks, and quick, comprehending glances. Their restraint was past when he had finished. "I watched you down the road out of sight," she said, "that afternoon." Her voice trailed out to nothingness. She turned and looked, after a little interval of silence, again searchingly into his eyes. "It is a wonderful thing," she said, "a great marvel that we have seen together." The faint, incessant drone of many hummingbirds invaded the dreamy quiet of the veranda. It had been a very dry, hot summer, a lingering summer, that summer of 1842. There were still a great many hummingbirds, and the warm fragrance of the honeysuckle poured itself out fervidly. Through the quiet of the warm noon, there came the sound of footsteps from the hallway, and Mr. O'Hara and the lovely ladies stood up as Mrs. Foote came out upon the veranda. Mr. O'Hara bowed again from the waist, the fingers of his right hand resting gallantly, fan-like, upon his broad chest, his hat held smartly. "This is Mr. James O'Hara, from Middletown, Mother," said Miss Foote. Hospitality beamed from Mrs. Foote's kind face. This was a very personable young gentleman who had ridden over from Middletown to pay a call upon her daughter. "Dinner is just ready, Mr. O'Hara," said Mrs. Foote. "Sam will take your horse." She turned into the house to see about the extra place at the table. "John, John," they heard her calling. "John, get a bottle of that cowslip wine out of the cupboard next the milk room. Will you, dear?" End of The Wonderful Thing by Henry S. Whitehead.
An Unfinished Story by O. Henry, read for Dreams Collection 3 by Winnifred Assmann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Unfinished Story by O. Henry. We no longer groan and heap ashes upon our heads when the flames of Tophet are mentioned. For even the preachers have begun to tell us that God is radium, or ether, or some scientific compound, and that the worst we wicked ones may expect is a chemical reaction. This is a pleasing hypothesis, but there lingers yet some of the old goodly terror of orthodoxy. There are but two subjects upon which one may discourse with a free imagination and without the possibility of being controverted. You may talk of your dreams, and you may tell what you heard a parrot say. Both Morpheus and the bird are incompetent witnesses, and your listener dare not attack your recital. The baseless fabric of a vision, then, shall furnish my theme, chosen with apologies and regrets instead of the more limited field of pretty Polly's small talk. I had a dream that was so far removed from the higher criticism that it had to do with the ancient, respectable, and lamented bar of judgment theory. Gabriel had played his trump, and those of us who could not follow suit were arraigned for examination. I noticed at one side a gathering of professional bondsmen in solemn black and collars that buttoned behind, but it seemed there was some trouble about their real estate titles, and they did not appear to be getting any of us out. A fly cop, an angel policeman, flew over to me and took me by the left wing. Near at hand was a group of very prosperous-looking spirits arraigned for judgment. "Do you belong with that bunch?" the policeman asked. "Who are they?" was my answer. "Why," said he, "they are—" But this irrelevant stuff is taking up space that the story should occupy. Dulcie worked in a department store. She sold Hamburg edging, or stuffed peppers, or automobiles, or other little trinkets such as they keep in department stores. Of what she earned, Dulcie received $6 per week. The remainder was credited to her and debited to somebody else's account in the ledger kept by Oh, Primal Energy, you say, Reverend Doctor. Well then, in the ledger of Primal Energy. During her first year in the store, Dulcie was paid $5 per week. It would be instructive to know how she lived on that amount. Don't care? Very well. Probably you are interested in larger amounts. $6 is a larger amount. I will tell you how she lived on $6 per week. One afternoon at 6, when Dulcie was sticking her hat pin within 1/8 of an inch of her medulla oblongata, she said to her chum Sadie, the girl that waits on you with her left side, "Say, Sade, I made a date for dinner this evening with Peggy." "You never did!" exclaimed Sadie admiringly. "Well, ain't you the lucky one? Piggy's an awful swell, and he always takes a girl to swell places. He took Blanche up to the Hoffman House one evening, where they have swell music, and you see a lot of swells. You'll have a swell time, Dulce." Dulcie hurried homeward. Her eyes were shining, and her cheeks showed the delicate pink of real life's approaching dawn. It was Friday, and she had 50 cents left of her last week's wages. The streets were filled with the rush-hour floods of people. The electric lights of Broadway were glowing, calling moths from miles, from leagues, from hundreds of leagues out of the darkness around to come in and attend the singeing school. Men in accurate clothes, with faces like those carved on cherry stones by the old salts in sailors' homes, turned and stared at Dulcie as she sped, unheeding, past them. Manhattan, the night blooming cereus, was beginning to unfold its dead-white, heavy-odored petals. Dulcie stopped in a store where goods were cheap, and bought an imitation lace collar with her 50 cents. That money was to have been spent otherwise. 15 cents for supper, 10 cents for breakfast, 10 cents for lunch. Another dime was to be added to her small store of savings, and 5 cents was to be squandered for licorice drops, the kind that made your cheek look like the toothache and last as long. The licorice was an extravagance, almost a carouse. But what is life without pleasures? Dulcie lived in a furnished room. There is this difference between a furnished room and a boarding house. In a furnished room, other people do not know it when you go hungry. Dulcie went up to her room, the third floor back in a west side brownstone front. She lit the gas. Scientists tell us that the diamond is the hardest substance known. Their mistake. Landladies know of a compound beside which the diamond is as putty. They pack it in the tips of gas burners, and one may stand on a chair and dig at it in vain until one's fingers are pink and bruised. A hairpin will not remove it. Therefore, let us call it immovable. So Dulcie lit the gas. In its 1/4 candle-power glow, we will observe the room. Couch bed, dresser, table, washstand, chair. Of this much the landlady was guilty. The rest was Dulcie's. On the dresser were her treasures: a gilt china vase presented to her by Sadie, a calendar issued by a pickle works, a book on the divination of dreams, some rice powder in a glass dish, and a cluster of artificial cherries tied with a pink ribbon. Against the wrinkly mirror stood pictures of General Kitchener, William Muldoon, the Duchess of Marlborough, and Benvenuto Cellini. Against one wall was a plaster of Paris plaque of an O'Callaghan in a Roman helmet. Near it was a violent oleograph of a lemon-colored child assaulting an inflammatory butterfly. This was Dulcie's final judgment in art, but it had never been upset. Her rest had never been disturbed by whispers of stolen copes. No critic had elevated his eyebrows at her infantile entomologist. Piggy was to call for her at 7. While she swiftly makes ready, let us discreetly face the other way and gossip. For the room, Dulcie paid $2 per week. On weekdays, her breakfast cost 10 cents. She made coffee and cooked an egg over the gaslight while she was dressing. On Sunday mornings, she feasted royally on veal chops and pineapple fritters at Billy's restaurant at a cost of 25 cents and tipped the waitress 10 cents. New York presents so many temptations for one to run into extravagance. She had her lunches in the department store restaurant at a cost of 60 cents for the week. Dinners were $1.05. The evening papers, Show Me a New Yorker Going Without His Daily Paper, came to 6 cents, and 2 Sunday papers, one for the personal column and the other to read, were 10 cents. The total amounts to $4.76. Now, one has to buy clothes and... I give it up. I hear of wonderful bargains in fabrics and of miracles performed with needle and thread, but I am in doubt. I hold my pen poised in vain when I would add to Dulcie's life some of those joys that belong to woman by virtue of all the unwritten, sacred, natural, inactive ordinances of the equity of heaven. Twice she had been to Coney Island and had ridden the hobby horses. 'Tis a weary thing to count your pleasures by summers instead of by hours. Piggy needs but a word. When the girls named him, an undeserving stigma was cast upon the noble family of swine. The words of 3 letters lesson in the old blue spelling book begins with Piggy's biography. He was fat, he had the soul of a rat, the habits of a bat, and the magnanimity of a cat. He wore expensive clothes and was a connoisseur in starvation. He could look at a shop girl and tell you to an hour how long it had been since she had eaten anything more nourishing than marshmallows and tea. He hung about the shopping districts and prowled around in department stores with his invitations to dinner. Men who escort dogs upon the streets at the end of a string look down upon him. He is a type. I can dwell upon him no longer. My pen is not the kind intended for him. I am no carpenter. At 10 minutes to 7, Dulcie was ready. She looked at herself in the wrinkly mirror. The reflection was satisfactory. The dark blue dress, fitting without a wrinkle, the hat with its jaunty black feather, the but slightly soiled gloves, all representing self-denial, even of food itself, were vastly becoming. Dulcie forgot everything else for a moment except that she was beautiful, and that life was about to lift a corner of its mysterious veil for her to observe its wonders. No gentleman had ever asked her out before. Now she was going for a brief moment into the glitter and exalted show. The girls said that Piggy was a spender. There would be a grand dinner and music and splendidly dressed ladies to look at, and things to eat that strangely twisted the girls' jaws when they tried to tell about them. No doubt she would be asked out again. There was a blue pongee suit in a window that she knew. By saving 20 cents a week instead of 10, it would run into years. But there was a second-hand store in 7th Avenue where... Somebody knocked at the door. Dulcie opened it. The landlady stood there with a spurious smile, sniffing for cooking by stolen gas. "A gentleman's downstairs to see you," she said. "Name is Mr. Wiggins." By such epithet was Piggy known to unfortunate ones who had to take him seriously. Dulcie turned to the dresser to get her handkerchief, and then she stopped still and bit her underlip hard. While looking in her mirror, she had seen fairyland and herself a princess, just awakening from a long slumber. She had forgotten one that was watching her with sad, beautiful, stern eyes, the only one there was to approve or condemn what she did. Straight and slender and tall, with a look of sorrowful reproach on his handsome, melancholy face, General Kitchener fixed his wonderful eyes on her out of his gilt photograph frame on the dresser. Dulcie turned like an automatic doll to the landlady. "Tell him I can't go," she said dully. "Tell him I'm sick or something. Tell him I'm not going out." After the door was closed and locked, Dulcie fell upon her bed, crushing her black tip, and cried for 10 minutes. General Kitchener was her only friend. He was Dulcie's ideal of a gallant knight. He looked as if he might have a secret sorrow, and his wonderful mustache was a dream, and she was a little afraid of that stern yet tender look in his eyes. She used to have little fancies that he would call at the house sometime and ask for her, with his sword clanking against his high boots. Once, when a boy was rattling a piece of chain against a lamp-post, she had opened the window and looked out. But there was no use. She knew that General Kitchener was away over in Japan, leading his army against the savage Turks, and he would never step out of his gilt frame for her. Yet one look from him had vanquished Piggy for that night. Yes, for that night. When her cry was over, Dulcie got up and took off her best dress and put on her old blue kimono. She wanted no dinner. She sang 2 verses of Sammy. Then she became intensely interested in a little red speck on the side of her nose. And after that was attended to, she drew up a chair to the rickety table and told her fortune with an old deck of cards. "The horrid, impudent thing," she said aloud, "and I never gave him a word or a look to make him think it." At 9 o'clock, Dulcie took a tin box of crackers and a little pot of raspberry jam out of her trunk and had a feast. She offered General Kitchener some jam on a cracker, but he only looked at her as the Sphinx would have looked at a butterfly, if there are butterflies in the desert. "Don't eat it if you don't want to," said Dulcie, "and don't put on so many airs and scold so with your eyes. I wonder if you'd be so superior and snippy if you had to live on $6 a week." It was not a good sign for Dulcie to be rude to General Kitchener. And then she turned Benvenuto Cellini face downward with a severe gesture. But that was not inexcusable, for she had always thought he was Henry VIII, and she did not approve of him. At 9:30, Dulcie took a last look at the pictures on the dresser, turned out the light, and skipped into bed. It's an awful thing to go to bed with a good-night look at General Kitchener, William Muldoon, the Duchess of Marlborough, and Benvenuto Cellini. This story really doesn't get anywhere at all. The rest of it comes later, sometime when Piggy asks Dulcie again to dine with him, and she is feeling lonelier than usual, and General Kitchener happens to be looking the other way, and then... As I said before, I dreamed that I was standing near a crowd of prosperous-looking angels, and a policeman took me by the wing and asked if I belonged with them. "Who are they?" I asked. "Why," said he, "they are the men who hired working girls and paid 'em $5 or $6 a week to live on. Are you one of the bunch?" "Not on your immortality," said I. "I'm only the fellow that set fire to an orphan asylum and murdered a blind man for his pennies." End of an unfinished story by O. Henry. My Dream by Christina Rossetti, read for Dreams Collection 3 by Winnifred Assmann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. My Dream by Christina Rossetti. Hear now a curious dream I dreamed last night, each word whereof is weighed and sifted truth. I stood beside Euphrates while it swelled, like overflowing Jordan in its youth. It waxed and coloured sensibly to sight, till out of myriad pregnant waves there welled young crocodiles, a gaunt, blunt-featured crew, fresh-hatched perhaps, and daubed with birthday dew. The rest, if I should tell, I fear my friend, my closest friend, would deem the facts untrue, and therefore it were wisely left untold. Yet if you will, why, hear it to the end. Each crocodile was girt with massive gold, and polished stones that with their wearers grew. But one there was, who waxed beyond the rest, wore kinglier girdle and a kingly crown, whilst crowns and orbs and sceptres starred his breast. All gleamed compact and green with scale on scale, but special burnishment adorned his mail, and special terror weighed upon his frown. His punier brethren quaked before his tail, broad as a rafter, potent as a flail. So he grew lord and master of his kin. But who shall tell the tale of all their woes? An execrable appetite arose. He battened on them, crunched and sucked them in. He knew no law, he feared no binding law, but ground them with inexorable jaw. The luscious fat distilled upon his chin, exuded from his nostrils and his eyes, while still like hungry death he fed his maw, till every minor crocodile being dead, and buried too, himself gorged to the full, he slept with breath oppressed and unstrung claw. O marvel passing strange which next I saw! In sleep he dwindled to the common size, and all the empire faded from his coat. Then from far off a winged vessel came, swift as a swallow, subtle as a flame. I know not what it bore of freight or host, but white it was as an avenging ghost. It levelled strong Euphrates in its course. Supreme, yet weightless as an idle mote, it seemed to tame the waters without force, till not a murmur swelled or billow beat. Lo, as the purple shadows swept the sands, the prudent crocodile rose on his feet, and shed appropriate tears and wrung his hands. What can it mean, you ask? I answer not for meaning, but myself must echo what? And tell it as I saw it on the spot. End of My Dream by Christina Rossetti.
The Dream by John Donne. Recorded for Dreams Collection 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Dear love, for nothing less than thee would I have broke this happy dream. It was a theme for reason much too strong for fantasy. Therefore thou wakest me wisely. Yet my dream thou brokest not, but continuedst it. Thou art so truth, that thoughts of thee suffice to make dreams truths, and fables histories. Enter these arms, for since thou thought'st it best not to dream all my dream, let's act the rest. As lightning or a taper's light, thine eyes, and not thy noise, waked me. Yet I thought thee, if thou lovest truth, an angel at first sight. But when I saw thou sawest my heart, and knew'st my thoughts, beyond an angel's art, when thou knew'st what I dreamt, when thou knew'st when excess of joy would wake me, and cam'st then, I must confess, it could not choose but be profane to think thee anything but thee. Coming and staying showed thee, but rising made me doubt that now thou art not thou, that love is weak where fear's as strong as he. 'Tis not all spirit pure and brave, if mixture it of fear, shame, honour have. Perchance as torches which must ready be, men light and put out, so thou deal'st with me. Thou cam'st to kindle, goest to come, then I will dream that hope again, but else would die. End of poem.
The Dreamer by Katharine, Pyle. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by JoeBer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Dreamer by Katharine, Pyle. There once lived a man and his wife named Peter and Kate, and they were so poor that they had scarcely enough bread to put in their mouths. They lived in a wretched, miserable hut, and in front of the hut was a river, and back of it a patch of ground and a gnarled old apple tree. One night, when Peter was sleeping, he dreamed a dream, and in this dream a tall old man dressed in grey and with a long grey beard came to him and said, "Peter, I know that you have had a hard life and have neither grumbled nor complained, and now I have a mind to help you. Follow down the river until you come to a bridge. On the other side of the river you will see a town. Take up your stand on the bridge and wait there patiently. It may be that nothing will happen the first day, and it may be that nothing will happen the second day either. But if you do not lose courage and still wait patiently, sometime during the third day someone will come to you and tell you something that will make your fortune for you." In the morning, when Peter awoke, he told his dream to Kate, his wife. "It would be a curious thing if I should do as the old man told me and really become rich," said he. "Nonsense," answered his wife. "Dreams are nothing but foolishness. Do you go over to neighbour Godkin and see whether he has not some wood to be cut, so you can earn a few pence to buy meal for tomorrow." So Peter did as his wife told him, and went over to his neighbour's and worked there all day. And by evening he had almost forgotten his dream. But that night, as soon as he fell asleep, the old man appeared before him again. "Why have you not done as I told you, Peter?" said he. "Remember, good luck will not wait forever. Tomorrow, do you set out for the bridge and town I told you of, and believe, for it is the truth, if you wait there for 3 days and make the best of what will then be told you, you will become a rich man." When Peter awoke the next morning, his first thought was to set out in search of the bridge and town of which the old man had told him. But still his wife dissuaded him. "Do not be so foolish," said she. "Sit down and eat your breakfast, and be thankful that you have it. You've earned a few pence yesterday, and who knows but what you may be lucky enough to earn even more today." So Peter did not set out on his journey in search of fortune that day either. But the next night, for the third time, the old man appeared before him, and now his look was stern and forbidding. "Thou fool," said he, 3 times have I come to thee, and now I will come no more. Go to the bridge of which I have spoken, and listen well to what is there said to thee. Otherwise want and poverty will still be thy portion, even as they have been heretofore." With this, the old man disappeared, and Peter awoke. and now it was of no use for his wife to scold and argue. As the old man had commanded, so Peter would do. He only stopped to put some food in his stomach and more in his pockets, and off he set, one foot before another. For a long time Peter journeyed on down the river till he was both footsore and weary, and then he came to a bridge that crossed a stream, and on the other side was a town, and Peter felt almost sure that this was the place to which the old man of his dreams had told him to come. So he took his stand on the bridge and stayed there all day. The passers-by stared at him, and some of them spoke to him, but none of them said to him anything that might by any chance lead him on to fortune. All that day he waited on the bridge, and all the day after, and by the time the third day had come, he had eaten all the food he had brought with him, except one hard, dry crust of bread. Then he began to wonder whether he were not a simpleton to be loitering there day after day, all because of a dream, when he might perhaps be earning a few pennies at home in one way or another. Now just beyond this bridge there was a tailor shop, and the tailor who lived there was a very curious man. Ever since Peter had taken his stand on the bridge, the tailor had been peeping out at him and wondering why he was standing there, and what his business might be, and the longer Peter stayed, the more curious the tailor became. He fussed and he fidgeted, and along toward the afternoon of the third day he could bear it no longer, and he put aside his work and went out to the bridge to find out what he could about Peter and what he was doing there. When he came where Peter was, he bade him good day. "Good day," answered Peter. "Are you waiting here on the bridge for someone?" asked the tailor. "I am, and I am not," replied Peter. "Now what may be the meaning of that?" asked the tailor. "How can you be waiting, and still not be waiting all at one and the same time?" "I am waiting for someone, that is true," said Peter, "but I know not who he is, nor whence he will come, nor for that matter, that whether anyone will come at all." And then he related to the tailor his dream, and how he had been told that if he waited on the bridge for 3 days, someone would come along and tell him something that would make him rich for life. "Why, what a silly fellow you are," said the tailor. "I too have dreamed dreams, but I have too much sense to pay any attention to them. Only last week I dreamed 3 times that an old man came to me and told me to follow up along the bank of the river until I came to a hut where a man and his wife lived. The man's name was Peter, and his wife's name was Kate. I was to go and dig among the roots of an apple tree back of this house, and there, buried among the roots of the tree, I would find a chest of golden money. That was what I dreamed. But did I go wandering off in search of such a place? No, indeed. I am not such a simpleton. I stick to my work, and I can manage to keep a warm roof over my head, and have plenty of food to eat, and when I am dressed in my best, there is not one of the neighbours that looks half as fine as I do. No, no, go back to where you belong, and set to work, my man, and maybe you can earn something better than those miserable rags you are wearing now." So said the tailor, and then he went back to his tailor's bench and his sewing. But Peter stood and scratched his head. "A man named Peter, and his wife named Kate, and an apple tree behind the house," said he. "Now, it's a strange thing if a fortune's been lying there under the roots of the apple tree all this while, and I had to come to this town and this bridge to hear about it." So said Peter as he stood there on the bridge. But then, after he had scratched his head and thought a bit longer, he pulled his hat down over his ears and off he set for home. The further he went, the more of a hurry he was in, and at last, when he came within sight of his house again, he was all out of breath with the haste he had made. He did not wait to go inside, but he bawled to his wife to fetch him a pick and shovel, and ran around the house to where the apple tree stood. His wife did not know what had happened to him. She thought he must have lost his wits, but she brought him the pick and shovel, and he began digging around the roots of the apple tree. He had not dug for so very long when his pick struck something hard. He flung the pick aside and seized his spade, and presently he uncovered the great chest made of stout oak wood and bound around with iron. The chest was so heavy that he could not lift it out of the hole himself, and his wife had to help him. The chest was locked, but that mattered little to Peter. He took his pick, and with a few blows he broke the hinges and fastenings and lifted the lid from its place. At once he gave a loud cry and fell on his knees beside the chest. He and his wife could scarce believe in their good fortune. It was brimming over with golden money, enough to make them rich for life. They carried the chest into the house and barred the door and set about counting the money. And there was so much of it that they were all evening and part of the night counting it. That was the way good fortune came to Peter, and all by way of a dream. Now he and his wife built themselves a great house, and had fine food, and coaches, and horses, and handsome clothes, and they feasted the neighbours, and never a poor man came to the door but what they gave him as much food as he could eat, and a piece of silver to put in his pocket. One day Peter put on his finest clothes and made his wife dress herself in her best, and then they stepped into one of their coaches, and Peter bade the coachman drive to the town, where he had stood on the bridge and listened to the tailor tell his dream of the chest of money buried under the apple tree. Peter made the coachman drive up in front of the tailor shop, and when the tailor saw the coach stopping at his door and the fine people sitting in it, he thought it was some great nobleman and his wife, come perhaps to order a suit of clothes from him. He came out, bowing and smiling and smirking, and Peter said to him, "Do you remember me?" "No, your lordship," answered the tailor, still bowing and smiling. "I have not that honour, your lordship." Then Peter told him he was the ragged fellow who had stood out there on the bridge waiting for good luck to come to him. And sure enough, it had. For if it had not been for the dream the tailor told him, he would have known nothing about the gold buried under the apple tree, and would never have become the rich man he was now. When the tailor heard this tale, he was ready to tear his hair out, for if he had believed his dream, he might have found the gold himself and have kept a share of it. However, Peter gave him 100 gold pieces to comfort him, and ordered a fine suit. He also promised that after that he would buy all his clothes from the tailor and pay him a good price for them. So the tailor too got some good from all the dreaming. End of The Dreamer by Katharine Pyle.
L'Invitation au Voyage by Charles Baudelaire, translated by Arthur Symons. Recorded for Dreams Collection 3 by Algy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There is a wonderful country, a country of cocaine, they say, which I dreamed of visiting with an old friend. It is a strange country, lost in the mists of the north, and one might call it the east of the west, the China of Europe. So freely does a warm and capricious fancy flourish there, and so patiently and persistently has that fancy illustrated it with a learned and delicate vegetation. A real country of cocaine, where everything is beautiful, rich, quiet, honest, where order is the likeness and the mirror of luxury, where life is fat and sweet to breathe, where disorder, tumult, and the unexpected are shut out, where happiness is wedded to silence, where even cooking is poetic, rich and highly flavoured at once, where all, dear love, is made in your image. You know that feverish sickness which comes over us in our cold miseries, that nostalgia of unknown lands, that anguish of curiosity? There is a country made in your image, where all is beautiful, rich, quiet, and honest, where fancy has built and decorated a Western China, where life is sweet to breathe, where happiness is wedded to silence. It is there that we should live. It is there that we should die. Yes, it is there that we should breathe, dream, and lengthen out the hours by the infinity of sensations. A musician has written an Invitation à la valse. Who will compose the Invitation au Voyage that we can offer to the beloved, to the chosen sister? Yes, it is in this atmosphere that it would be good to live, far off, where slower hours contain more thoughts, where clocks strike happiness with a deeper and more significant solemnity. On shining panels or on gilded leather of dark richness slumbers the discreet life of pictures, deep, calm, and devout as the souls of the painters who created it. The sunsets which colour so richly the walls of dining room and drawing room are sifted through beautiful hangings or through tall wrought windows leaded into many panes. The pieces of furniture are large, curious, and fantastic, armed with locks and secrets like refined souls. Mirrors, metals, hangings, goldsmiths' work and pottery play for the eyes a mute and mysterious symphony. And from all things, from every corner, from the cracks of drawers, and from the folds of hangings, exhales a singular odour, a forget-me-not of Sumatra, which is, as it were, the soul of the abode. A real country of cocaine, I assure you, where all is beautiful, clean, and shining, like a clear conscience, like a bright array of kitchen crockery, like splendid jewellery of gold, like many-coloured jewellery of silver. All the treasures of the world have found their way there, as to the house of a hard-working man who has put the whole world in his debt. Singular country, excelling others as art excels nature, where nature is refashioned by dreams, where nature is corrected, embellished, remoulded. Let the alchemists of horticulture seek and seek again, let them set ever further and further back the limits to their happiness. Let them offer prizes of 60 and of 100,000 florins to whoever will solve their ambitious problems. For me, I have found my black tulip and my blue dahlia. Incomparable flower, recaptured tulip, allegorical dahlia, it is there, is it not, in that beautiful country, so calm and so full of dreams, that you live and flourish? There, would you not be framed within your own analogy, and would you not see yourself again reflected, as the mystics say, in your own correspondence? Dreams, dreams ever! And the more delicate and ambitious the soul, the further do dreams estrange it from possible things. Every man carries within himself his natural dose of opium, ceaselessly secreted and renewed, and from birth to death, how many hours can we reckon of positive pleasure, of successful and decided action? Shall we ever live in, shall we ever pass into, that picture which my mind has painted, that picture made in your image? These treasures, this furniture, this luxury, this order, these odours, these miraculous flowers, are you. You too are the great rivers and the quiet canals, the vast ships that drift down them, laden with riches, from whose decks comes the sound of the monotonous songs of labouring sailors, are my thoughts which slumber or rise and fall on your breast. You lead them softly towards the sea, which is the infinite, mirroring the depths of the sky in the crystal clearness of your soul. And when, weary of the surge and heavy with the spoils of the East, they return to the port of their birth, it is still my thoughts that come back enriched out of the infinite to you. End of L'Invitation au Voyage by Charles Baudelaire.
Sweet One Darling and the Dream-Fairies by Eugene Field. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by Claudia Caldi. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sweet One Darling and the Dream-Fairies by Eugene Field. A wonderful thing happened one night. Those who never heard of it before will hardly believe it. Sweet One Darling was lying in her little cradle with her eyes wide open, and she was trying to make up her mind whether she should go to sleep or keep awake. this is often a hard matter for little people to determine. Sweet One Darling was ready for sleep and dreams. She had on her nightgown and her nightcap, and her mother had kissed her good night. But the day had been so very pleasant, with its sunshine and its play and its many other diversions, that Sweet One Darling was quite unwilling to give it up. It was high time for the little girl to be asleep. The robins had ceased their evening song in the maple, a tree-toad croaked monotonously outside, and the cricket was chirping certain confidences to the strange shadows that crept furtively everywhere in the yard and garden. Some folk believe that the cricket is in league with the Dream-Fairies. They say that what sounds to us like a faint chirping merely is actually the call of the cricket to the Dream-Fairies to let those pretty little creatures know that it is time for them to come with their dreams. I more than half believe this myself, for I have noticed that it is while the cricket is chirping that the Dream-Fairies come with their wonderful sights that seem oftentimes very real. Sweet One Darling heard the voice of the cricket, and maybe she knew what it meant. There are a great many things which Sweet One Darling knows all about, but of which she says nothing to other people. Although she is only a year old, she is undoubtedly the most knowing little person in all the world, and the fact that she is the most beautiful and the most amiable of human beings is the reason why she is called by that name of Sweet One Darling. Maybe, and it is quite likely that, with all the other wonderful things she knew, Sweet One Darling understood about the arrangement that existed between the cricket and the Dream-Fairies. At any rate, just as soon as she heard that cricket gave its signal note, she smiled a smile of gratification and looked very wise indeed, as much as to say, "The cricket and I know a thing worth knowing." Then, all of a sudden, there was a faint sound as of the rustle of gossamer silken wings, and the very next moment 2 of the cunningest fairies you ever saw were standing upon the window-sill, just over the honeysuckle. They had come from somewhere, and it was evident that they were searching for somebody, for they peered cautiously and eagerly into the room. One was dressed in a bright yellow suit of butterfly silk, and the other wore a suit of dark grey mothsine, which, as perhaps you know, is a dainty fabric made of the fine strands which grey moths spin. Each of these fairies was of the height of a small cambric needle, and both together would not have weighed much more than the 1/16th part of 4 dewdrops. You will understand from this that these fairies were as tiny creatures as could well be imagined. "Sweet One Darling, oh Sweet One Darling," they cried softly. "Where are you?" Sweet One Darling pretended that she did not hear, and she cuddled down close in her cradle and laughed heartily all to herself. The mischievous little thing knew well enough whom they were calling, and I am sure she knew what they wanted, but she meant to fool them and hide from them a while. That is why she did not answer. But nobody can hide from the Dream-Fairies, and least of all could Sweet One Darling hide from them, for presently her laughter betrayed her, and the 2 Dream-Fairies perched on her cradle, one at each side, and looked smilingly down upon her. "Hello," said Sweet One Darling, for she saw that her hiding-place was discovered. This was the first time I had ever heard her speak, and I didn't know till then that even wee little babies talk with fairies, particularly Dream-Fairies. "Hello, Sweet One Darling," said Gleam of the Murk, for that was the name of the Dream-Fairy in the dark grey mothsine. "And hello from me too," cried Frisk and Glitter, the other visitor, the one in the butterfly silk suit. "You have come earlier than usual?" suggested Sweet One Darling. "No, indeed," answered Frisk and Glitter. "This is the accustomed hour, but the day has been so happy that it has passed quickly. For that reason you should be glad to see me, for I bring dreams of the day, the beautiful golden day with its benediction of sunlight, its grace of warmth, and its wealth of mirth and play." "And I," said Gleam of the Murk, "I bring dreams too, but my dreams are of the night. and they are full of the gentle, soothing music of the winds, of the pines, and of the crickets. And they are full of fair visions in which you shall see the things of fairyland and of dreamland, and of all the mysterious countries that compose the vast world of somewhere away out beyond the silvery mist of night.
"Dear me," cried Sweet One Darling, "I should never be able to make a choice between you two, for both of you are equally acceptable. I am sure I should love to have the pleasant play of the daytime brought back to me, and I'm quite as sure that I want to see all the pretty sights that are unfolded by the dreams which Gleam the Merc brings."
Sweet One Darling was so distressed that her cunning little underlip drooped and quivered perceptibly. She feared that her indecision would forfeit her the friendship of both the Dream-Fairies. "You have no need to feel troubled," said Frisk and Glitter, "for you are not expected to make any choice between us. We have our own way of determining the question, as you shall presently understand." Then the Dream-Fairies explained that whenever they came of an evening to bring their dreams to a little child, they seated themselves on the child's eyelids and tried to rock them down. Gleam the Merc would sit and rock upon one eyelid, and Frisk and Glitter would sit and rock on the other. If Gleam the Merc's eyelid closed first, the child would dream the dreams Gleam the Merc brought it. If Frisk and Glitter's eyelid closed first, why then, of course, the child dreamt the dreams Frisk and Glitter brought. It would be hard to conceive of an arrangement more amicable.
"But suppose," suggested Sweet One Darling, "suppose both eyelids close at the same instant, which one of you fairies has his own way then?"
"In that event," said they, "neither of us wins. And since neither wins, the sleeper does not dream at all, but awakes next morning from a sound, dreamless, refreshing sleep." Sweet One Darling was not sure that she fancied this alternative, but of course she could not help herself, so she let the two little Dream-Fairies flutter across her shoulders and clamber up her cheeks to their proper places upon her eyelids. Gracious, but how heavy they seemed when they once stood on her eyelids! As I told you before, their actual combined weight hardly exceeded the 16th part of 4 dewdrops, yet when they are perched on a little child's eyelids, tired eyelids at that, it really seems sometimes as if they weighed a ton. It was just all she could do to keep her eyelids open, yet Sweet One Darling was determined to be strictly neutral. She loved both the Dream-Fairies equally well, and she would not for all the world have shown either one any partiality. Well, there the two Dream-Fairies sat on Sweet One Darling's eyelids, each one trying to rock his particular eyelid down, and each one sang his little lullaby in the pipingest voice imaginable. I'm not positive, but as nearly as I can remember, Frisk and Glitter's song ran in this wise: "Dream, dreamer, dreamer, of meadow, wood, and stream, of bird and bee, of flower and tree, all under the noonday gleam, of the song and play of mirthful day. Dreamer, dreamer, dreamer." This was very soothing, as you would suppose. While Frisk and Glitter sang it, Sweet One Darling's eyelid drooped and drooped and drooped, until, goodness me, it seemed actually closed. But at the critical moment, the other Dream-Fairy, Gleam the Merc, would pipe up his song somewhat in this fashion: "Dream, dream, dream of glamour, glint and gleam of the shabby things the night wind sings to the moon and the stars abeam of whimsical sights in the land of sprites. Dream, dream, dream." And under the spell of this pretty lullaby, the other eyelid would speedily overtake the first, and so for a goodly time there was actually no such thing even as guessing which of those two eyelids would close sooner than the other. It was the most exciting contest for an amicable one I ever saw. As for Sweet One Darling, she seemed to be lost presently in the magic of the Dream-Fairies, and although she has never said a word about it to me, I am quite sure that, while her dear eyelids drooped and drooped and drooped to the rocking and the singing of the Dream-Fairies, it was her lot to enjoy a confusion of all those precious things promised by her two fairy visitors. Yes, I'm sure that from under her drooping eyelids she beheld the scenes of the mirthful day intermingled with peeps of fairyland, and that she heard, or seemed to hear, the music of dreamland harmonizing with the more familiar sounds of this world of ours. And when at last she was fast asleep, I could not say for certain which of her eyelids had closed first, so simultaneous was the downfall of her long dark lashes upon her flushed cheeks. I meant to have asked the Dream-Fairies about it, but before I could do so they whisked out of the window and away with their dreams to a very sleepy little boy who was waiting for them somewhere in the neighborhood. So you see, I am unable to tell you which of the Dream-Fairies won. Maybe neither did. Maybe Sweet One Darling's sleep that night was dreamless. I have questioned her about it, and she will not answer me. This is all the wonderful tale I had to tell. Maybe it will not seem so wonderful to you, for perhaps you, too, have felt the Dream-Fairies rocking your eyelids down with gentle lullaby music. Perhaps you, too, know all the precious dreams they bring. In that case, you will bear witness that my tale, even though it be not wonderful, is strictly true. End of Sweet One Darling and the Dream-Fairies by Eugene Field.
The Giant's Cliff by Katharine Pyle. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by JoeBer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Giant's Cliff, an Irish Story by Katharine Pyle. There was once a giant in Ireland, and his name was Mahon MacMahon, and he lived inside the cliffs that rose up straight from the sea. No one had ever seen door or window in the cliffs, and no one knew how the giant got in or out, but still it was said that he lived there. And there were those who told of how they had heard a strange sound of beating and the ringing of metal sounding from within, and had seen smoke rising up from the crevices. Back from the sea, but yet not so very far from the cliffs, there was a fine big house, and a man by the name of Thomas Renardi lived in it. He was a married man, and he and his wife had one son, a pretty little boy named Philip, and he was the joy of their life and the light of their eyes. With every year the boy grew handsomer and finer, till he was the admiration of all who saw him. All day he played about in the sun and the wind, and when his mother called him into meals, he came, and as soon as he had finished, he was out again. So he grew till he was 7 years old, and then one day his mother called him, but he did not come. She hunted him high and she hunted him low, but nowhere could she find him. Then the neighbours joined in the search. They were out hallooing all over the hills and through the forest, and over by the cliffs where the sea beats high. But there was no answer to their calling, nor did they see aught of him, and his mother was left sorrowing. A sad and smileless woman was she after that, and months rolled up into years, until the years were 7, and at the end of that time her grief for him was as green as at the beginning. Now there was a blacksmith in that country, who was a great reader of dreams. People came from far and near to tell him their dreams, and to ask the meaning of them. The name of the blacksmith was Robert Kelly, and he was a great hand at the forge. One night the blacksmith had a dream of his own, and a curious dream it was. He dreamed a little lad came riding up on a great white horse. He was a handsome little fellow, with yellow hair and blue eyes, and Robert took him from his size and looks to be about 7 years old, but at the same time There was something curious about him that made the blacksmith think he might be older. "Robert Kelly, do you remember me?" asked the lad. "I can't say that I do," answered the blacksmith. "And yet there's something about you that makes me feel I may have seen you before." "Then have you forgotten Phil Renardi that was lost away 7 long years ago?" Now the blacksmith knew of whom the boy had reminded him. It was of that little lost lad of the Renardis. "But that was 7 long years ago, as you said," replied the blacksmith. "And by this time Phil will be about 14 years old. You will never be him." "Nevertheless, I am," said the boy. "It was the giant, Man MacMahon, that stole me away 7 years ago when I was playing near the cliffs. And I have been living with him and serving him ever since, and in the halls of the giant, we who serve him never grow old, but stay as we were when he first brought us there." Now all the while the blacksmith knew he was asleep, and he thought this dream of his was the strangest dream he had ever heard of. "Now I will tell you why I have come here." The boy went on, and he told Kelly how the very next night the 7 years of his service were up. "Every 7 years," said he, "the giant's door stands open from the stroke of midnight till cocks crow the next morning. There is only one way to get to his door, and that is by way of the sea." The lad then begged and implored the blacksmith to get a boat and row out to the cliff the next night, and to wait there until midnight when the house opened. The blacksmith was then to seek through it until he found the lad, and then he was to bring him away with him. "And tomorrow, when my first 7 years of service is up, is the only time you can do it," said he. "If you will not, then I can never escape, but must stay there in service to the giant for always." Then Kelly, who still knew he was asleep, said, "But after all, this is all in a dream, and when I waken, I think there's no meaning to it. Then I'll give you a token to prove to you that this is no common dreaming," said Philip. With that, he turned his horse about, and the horse lashed out at the blacksmith with his hind leg, and the hoof struck him on the forehead with such force that it seemed as though his head would be crushed in. The blacksmith cried out with the blow, and woke to find the blood streaming down his face. And when he had wiped it away and was able to examine his forehead, there was the mark of a horseshoe on it. Robert said nothing to anyone about his dream, not even when they saw the mark on his forehead and wondered about it. So they thought that, in some way, when he was shoeing a horse, it must have managed to kick him. But that night he went secretly to a friend of his who had a boat and asked him whether he would row him out in front of the cliffs just before midnight. The friend was loath to do it, for he had small liking for going out at night on the sea, and to a place that was but ill thought of, for there were all these tales about sounds that had been heard from inside the cliff, and that they might be made by Mahan MacMahon. However, in the end Robert persuaded him, and a little before midnight they set out. There was enough moonlight for them to see the way to go, and as they rowed towards the cliff, Robert told his friend for the first time why he was coming there and what he hoped to do. "And whether it was a dream or no, I can't tell you," said he, "for I was sleeping, and yet here, all the same, is the mark of the horse's hoof on my forehead." Well, the friend thought it was a strange tale. "And it's hard to believe there's any truth in it," said he. "But here we are in front of the cliffs, and this night will prove the worth of your dreaming." He held the boat there in front of the rocks with his oars, and the minutes slipped by, and neither of the men spoke, and everything was silent. Then from far away and faintly they heard the village clock strike 12. Again they waited, and then suddenly and without a sound the front of the cliff opened, and they saw a portico down almost on a level with the water, and the great door opening out upon it. Inside the door were steps cut in the rock and leading up and out of sight. A light shone out through the door and across the water, but it was not very bright. "Here is where I chance it," said the blacksmith. Row me up close so that I may step out onto the portico, for according to my dream, it's in there I must go if I am to find little Philip Renardy." The whole matter was so strange that his friend tried to dissuade him from going, but the blacksmith would not listen to him. "I've a sign from him on my forehead," he said, "and go I must and will. Do you wait here for me till cocks crow, and if I haven't come by then, there's no use in your waiting longer." His friend rode him up close to the edge of the portico, and the blacksmith climbed out on it, and watchfully he crept over to the door and peered in. Everything was still, and he saw nothing but the steps leading upward, and they were so high, each one of them, that it was as much as he could do to climb them. He carried a ploughshare that he had brought with him from his smithy, for somehow he thought a ploughshare might be a good weapon if he needed one, and anyhow it gave him some sort of feeling of courage to have hold of it. He climbed the steps one after another, and that took him some time, and then he came into a great hall, and in the centre of it was a table hewn out of rock. Around this table sat 7 giants. They sat there bending forward as though they were consulting with each other, but none of them moved or spoke, or even so much as winked an eyelid. They might have been carven figures for all the signs of life they gave. At the head of the table sat a giant with a long beard, and he had been sitting there so long that his beard had grown into the slab of rock that was the top of the table. Robert Kelly stood there looking at them for a while, and then, as none of them took any notice of him, he called in a loud voice, "Is there anyone among you named Mahan MacMahon?" At that, the giant at the head of the table started up so suddenly that the pulling out of his beard split the rock of the table into pieces. But none of the others stirred nor looked at him. "I am Mahan MacMahon," cried the giant. "And what do you come seeking me for?" "I have come here in search of little Phil Renardy," cried the blacksmith boldly, "and I have been told that you are the one who can tell me where to find him." The giant looked at him in silence for a bit, and then he said, "Yes, I can tell you where to find him, and better than that, I can even show you where he is." He then led the way into a great stone chamber on beyond the hall, and it was glowing with fires, and there in it were a great number of young lads. It seemed to the blacksmith that there were hundreds of them, and they were all busy at some kind or other of metalwork. When Mahan MacMahon came in, they stopped their work and stood back against the wall, and the blacksmith saw that not one among them looked to be more than 7 years old, and they were all so much alike that they might have been brothers. "If you are a friend of Phil Renardy, no doubt you can choose him from all others," said the giant. "And now look about you, and if you can tell me at the first telling which is he, then you may take him away with you, and no harm to anyone. But if you cannot tell me, then it was an ill hour for you when you entered my house, for you'll never go out again." This frightened the blacksmith, but still he kept his wits about him, and looked carefully from one lad to the other. But for the life of him, he could not tell of a surety which was Phil Renardy, for he had no clear remembrance of him. In order to gain time, he said to the giant, "And are all these fine lads servants of yours?" "They are," replied Mahan MacMahon, "and it has taken me a long time to gather them together." "You must be a good master," went on Robert Kelly, "for they all look rosy and in good condition, and I'm sure you'll treat them well, and they must be fond of you." He thought by talking in this way he might flatter the giant and put him in a good humour. "That is a true word you have spoken," said the giant, "and I'm sure you must be an honest man, so let us shake hands upon it." He held out his hand to the blacksmith, but when Bob Kelly looked at it, it was so thick and broad and cruel-looking that he was afraid to trust his own hand to it. "For if he were to take the fancy," thought Bob, "he could crush it as easily as I could crush a rotten potato." So instead of putting his hand into the giant's, he put the ploughshare in it, and the giant shut his fingers tight on it, so that it crumbled up as though the iron had no more strength in it than a piece of paper. Praises be, it was not my hand he was squeezing, thought Robert Kelly. You have a strong hand, said the giant, but you need a stronger than that if you're to shake hands with Mahon MacMahon. Then all the little lads burst into laughter, but through the laughter he thought he heard someone sighing, Robert Kelly, Robert Kelly, I am here behind you. He turned about quickly, and there behind him was one lad among them who was not laughing. And like a flash the blacksmith seized hold of him and cried out, This is Phil Renardi, and the one I would take with me. Bad cess to you, cried the giant, but you have chosen rightly. Then all grew dark, but Robert Kelly kept tight hold of the boy he had chosen, and he could hear many voices about him crying, Happy Philip Renardi, happy Philip Renardi. The next he knew, the sun was shining, and he was lying on the grass at the top of the cliff, and the little lad was watching beside him. And are you, of a truth, the little Philip Renardi that's been lost for so long? Asked Kelly. I am that one, replied the lad, and it is you that has saved me. And now let us be up and off, for my heart is aching within me for the sight of my mother. So the blacksmith rose up and took the little lad's hand and led him to the big house of the Renardis, and the lad seemed to know the way better than he did. And no sooner did Mrs. Renardi see him than she knew the lad as her son, and was like to have gone distracted with the joy of it. There was a comfort to Bob Kelly too, for all the time he had kept wondering whether by chance he might not have brought back the wrong boy with him. When he at last left them and went back to his smithy, he found quite a crowd gathered there, talking about him, for when he hadn't come back to the boat, his friend had made sure the cliff had closed on him, and that mortal eye would never again behold him. But when the people who had gathered heard his tale, there was great rejoicing, and all the bells of the village were rung, and a great crowd hurried away to the Renardi's house to get a glimpse of the boy who had been stolen by the giant. Soon after his return, the boy began to grow again, but he never became very big, and there was always something a bit strange about him, though after a while he married and had children of his own, who were fine stout fellows, and all of them were wonderful workers in metals. As for Robert Kelly, his adventures were the making of him, for people came from everywhere to have him do their work for them, so as to have a chance to hear him tell his story. Moreover, Philip taught him some of the secrets of working with metal that he had learned in the giant's house, so that he became quite famous. But the giant was never heard of again, and no more sounds came from within the cliff house. So it was supposed that he had left that part of the country and chosen some other place as his dwelling. End of The Giant's Cliff by Katharine Pyle.
The Dream by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Recorded for Dreams Collection 3 by Jonathan Jones. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Dream. Love, if I weep it will not matter, and if you laugh I shall not care. Foolish am I to think about it, but it is good to feel you there. Love, in my sleep I dreamed of waking. White and awful the moonlight reached over the floor, and somewhere, there was a shutter loose, it screeched. Swung in the wind, no wind blowing. I was afraid and turned to you. Put out my hand to you for comfort, and you were gone, cold, cold as dew. Under my hand the moonlight lay. Love, if you laugh I shall not care, but if I weep it will not matter. Ah, it is good to feel you there. End of poem.
This recording is in the public domain.
The Good-Morrow by John Donne. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by Paula Messina. The Good-Morrow by John Donne. I wonder by my truth what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly? Or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den? 'Twas so, but this all pleasures fancies be. If ever any beauty I did see, which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. And now good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. For love all love of other sights controls, and makes one little room in everywhere. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone. Let maps to other worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world, each hath one, and is one. My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres, without sharp north, without declining west? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike that none can slacken, none can die. The Good-Morrow by John Donne. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Beautiful Dreamer Serenade by Stephen C. Foster. Read for Dreams Collection 3 by Paula Messina. Beautiful Dreamer Serenade by Stephen C. Foster. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of the rude world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight, have all passed away. Beautiful dreamer, queen of my song, list while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone are the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, out on the sea, mermaids are chanting the wild laurel-lea. Over the streamlet vapors are born, waiting to fade at the bright coming morn. Beautiful dreamer, beam on my heart, e'en as the morn on the streamlet and sea. Then will all clouds of sorrow depart. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. End of Beautiful Dreamer Serenade by Stephen C. Foster. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Sleeper by Edgar Allan Poe. Recorded for Dreams Collection 3 by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sleeper by Edgar Allan Poe. At midnight in the month of June, I stand beneath the mystic moon, and opiate vapor, dewy, dim, exhales from outer golden rim, and softly dripping, drop by drop, upon the quiet mountain top, steals drowsily and musically into the universal valley. The rosemary nods upon the grave, the lily lolls upon the wave. Wrapping the fog about its breast, the ruin moulders into rest. Looking like Lethe, see, the lake a conscious slumber seems to take, and would not for the world awake. All beauty sleeps, and lo, where lies Irene with her destinies? O lady bright, can it be right this window open to the night? The wanton airs from the treetop laughingly through the lattice drop. The bodiless airs, a wizard rout, flit through thy chamber in and out, and wave the curtain canopy so fitfully, so fearfully, above the closed and fringed lid, 'neath which thy slumbering soul lies hid. That o'er the floor and down the wall, like ghosts, the shadows rise and fall. O lady dear, hast thou no fear? Why and what art thou dreaming here? Sure thou art come o'er far-off seas, a wonder to these garden trees. Strange is thy pallor, strange thy dress, strange above all thy length of tress, and this all solemn silentness. The lady sleeps. O may her sleep, which is enduring, so be deep. Heaven have her in its sacred keep. This chamber change for one more holy, this bed for one more melancholy. I pray to God that she may lie forever with unopened eye, while the pale sheeted ghosts go by. My love, she sleeps. Oh, may her sleep, as it is lasting, so be deep. Soft may the worms about her creep, far in the forest, dim and old. For her may some tall vault unfold, some vault that hath oft flung its black and winged panels fluttering back, triumphant o'er the crested palls of her grand family funerals. Some sepulchre remote and lone, against whose portal she hath thrown in childhood many an idle stone, some tomb from out whose sounding door she ne'er shall force an echo more. Thrilling to think, poor child of sin, it was the dead who groaned therein. End of The Sleeper by Edgar Allan Poe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.